Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had a villainous family part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story and a 45-word from AO3. So let's start the video. Kingdom of Outcasts. I feel like I belong. Chapter text. Midoriya Izumi, a young girl with long curly hair, with a personality that wishes to become a hero. And she lives in a world where having a superpower allows one to become what they wish, but that gives her an issue with her wish of becoming one. She has no power, no quirk, and she is treated as both an outcast and nothing more than a bitch for a hero to take as his wife when she's of age. Nobody tried to see her actions through writing down quirks as a way for her to become a hero without a quirk. They viewed it as her trying to leave her place and usurp those with power. Because of that kind of thought process, she was ridiculed and beaten relentlessly. Ever since she reached the age of 5 and beyond, she was attacked by her peers within her school and around the neighborhood for even wishing to become something she clearly couldn't. After all, how could one become a hero if they couldn't defend themselves? Not that they gave her the chance to even defend herself, as each and every time she tried to defend herself, they'd attack with far more strength than she could handle. After each and every scuffle she'd gotten into, against her will, they'd left battle scars in the shape of burn scarring, cuts, bruises, and more all over her skin. Nothing was left unchecked, but because she didn't want to show that she was being abused by her peers. Izumi had used hero-grade makeup in order to hide any and all damage to her skin, hiding what she really looked like because of the society she lived in. Even her mother wasn't left out of the bullying of their peers, constantly told to give her daughter up so that she could have a different child who had a useful quirk. Though the mother didn't listen to the people around her at first, it eventually reached a point where even she couldn't handle all the psychological bullying and ended her own life. That was one of the worst days of Izumi's life, as she was placed in an orphanage to live out the rest of her days moving through the system. It was a cruel fate for someone who was quirkless in a society who prided itself on those who could use quirks. Due to her own upbringing, Izumi had looked at heroes with reverence as well as with awe and high expectations. And as her own life got worse over time, her vision of what a real hero really was had become worn down to the point that she gave up on the hero society she lived within. She went from being an outgoing young woman by the time she was in elementary school to being a very introverted young woman, who was very clearly abused but hid her true feelings behind a mask. People would attack her on the streets, villains and heroes alike, since they believed her to be plotting against them. That was when they saw her writing in her notebook. This society didn't treat her as though she were a true citizen. It was proven to be far worse when it took the one person she had left and turned them into something far worse than an indifferent friend. They changed his personality into that of those who treated her with hatred and very clear disgust. And he made it very clear where she stood in his eyes, as a woman who was nothing more than breeding stock to his life, a footnote in history. His name was Bakugo Katsuki, and he treated her with the worst that society had ever given her. But you could say that she stuck around him because of the fact that he never showed that she didn't exist anymore within their society. He gave her the time and day within his own day in order to give her attention, even if it was just to put down her dreams of becoming a hero with him. So as she was having quite literally one of her worst days of her life, she is seen walking home towards the orphanage. Passing near an underpass, one she walked under every single week of school for years. But there was something odd about it this time. Looking at her notebook, she found that it was burnt, waterlogged, and completely incapable of being used. Just had to blow it up and toss it into 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗵𝗃 outside. Izumi muttered before noticing something out of the corner of her eye. "What's that?" she asked, looking to her right. A green pipe was shown sticking out of the wall, its deep abyss showing nothing but darkness. Looking around the area, she found that it was quite literally the only thing that had been different about all the times she'd passed through this area. Her curiosity getting the better of her, she moved closer to the pipe itself and placed a palm on the outer rim of it. Rubbing the pipe itself, she found that it seemed as though it was beckoning her to enter through it, and with some slight hesitation, she thought about her life right now. There is quite literally nothing that could make my life any better here. Kaken had even told me to kill myself, I'm sure that nobody would even care if I disappeared. Izumi thought before reaching into the pipe to grab the inside edge. Climbing through the pipe, she felt herself suddenly become sucked into it, causing all her school supplies and belongings to be dropped on the ground. She let out a yelp of fear as she was pulled inside of the pipe, never to be heard from again. 𝗧𝗵𝗲? Izumi felt herself falling through the sky. She didn't know what was going on, but as she opened her eyes, she found herself looking at a very weird place. It was covered in mushrooms of differing colors as she took in her surroundings. She suddenly felt as though she were in a place she shouldn't be before she heard movement coming from nearby and rushed to hide on some nearby mushrooms. As her entire form trembled behind the mushroom top, she saw a few people who looked similar to the very mushrooms she hid behind. She watched them look at what appeared to be a very large pipe. That pipe wasn't that large last time I saw it. Izumi thought to herself. 𝗧𝗵𝗲? I thought I heard this pipe come to life earlier. Was it just my imagination? The weird creature said, their voice very disturbing. What are you doing here, Toad? Another voice asked, as Izumi took in this weird creature's appearance. They wore a blue vest and brown pants with brown dress shoes. Their head, though, was different from Toad's color, as Toad's had red colored in spots around his white head. This other one had blue colored in spots on their head as they searched the area. Was this pipe working earlier? Toad asked. Not that I know of. Why? They asked. It's probably nothing. We'd never gotten another person in this world since Mario and Luigi came here. Aside from the princess, they're the only humans living here. Toad said as the two of them walked away. Following the direction they were heading with her eyes, Izumi saw a gigantic castle nearby. It was white in color mainly, but the roofing tiles on the towers coming on the sides of the main castle were pink in color. They also showed what the princess vaguely looked like. A woman wearing a pink frilly dress with yellow hair and a crown sitting upon their head. And Izumi followed the Toads as she thought that they could lead her to where this princess was, at least so that she could see if she could have a place to live for now at least. Although, as she walked on top of the mushrooms, she came across a sight that was deeply sickening to her. The Toads were torturing some weird people who had only feet and appeared to look similar to the mushrooms she stood on, although they were brown in color with black iris. Looking down from where she stood, she saw that there were at least a few dozen of them in cages as they glared at the Toads with nothing but disdain. Izumi didn't know what was going on, but it was clear that the Toads were torturing these beings for information and climbed down from where she hid. Moving through the mushrooms using them as cover, she found herself near one of the Toads. Moving as fast as she could, she placed her palm over the guard's mouth and held them in a choke hold and moved further out into the mushrooms using them as cover. Once the Toad in her arms had completely fallen unconscious, she dropped them and placed a couple fingers to their neck, and once she felt a pulse, she let out a sigh of relief. And she continued this until there was only one Toad, who was now looking for his friends, and he decided to enter the forest of mushrooms to search for them. Izumi used this as a way to reach to the people who were being tortured by the Toads and broke them out of their bindings as well as prison. If you can run, then get out of here, Izumi said, urgently as one of the small creatures looked at her in shock. What about you? One of the creatures asked. Just go. Be before they come back, Izumi said, as she rushed out into the forest. Not allowing to let the kindness the human girl did for them pass him by, the small creature rushed over to a leaned-over green pipe. Rushing into it, him and his allies had disappeared from the area just as the Toad and his allies returned to their camp only to find their prisoners gone. Damn it. Princess Peach will not like how we lost some Goombas. They were the easiest to get information from, one of the Toads said, before looking around the area. From her hiding spot, Izumi overheard their conversation. Those were called Goombas? Well, at least I know their race, but are these Toads racist or something? They said Goomba with a high amount of disdain. Izumi thought to herself. She watched as the small troop of Toads left the area and felt that now was the perfect time to hightail it out of there. Turning around to leave, she found herself looking at a Toad who had climbed up to the mushroom top who just stopped to stare at her, a very familiar expression on their face. One that went from confusion to disdain to complete rage, reminding her of a boy who couldn't be calm for a moment in his life for once. She stepped backwards slightly as the toad in front of her pulled out his spear and pointed it at her as he shouted at her. "Hold it right there. State your name and why you are near this campsite." The toad yelled out, alerting his allies. "See crap. What am I supposed to say?" Izumi thought as she stared at the small toad. "Tell me your name and why you are here, human." The toad yelled, as Izumi heard the rapid footsteps coming towards the mushroom she was hiding on. Hi. Izumi asked as the toad glared at her. "Answer the question, human." The toad growled. Izumi then leaped out of the way as he moved closer to her, causing him to stare at her in confusion. All before he realized what she was planning on doing, and he gave chase after her as he rushed on the mushroom tops. Izumi had leaped from the mushroom tops and to the ground as she made to try and escape from the area, her fear of being caught saving those Goombas far surpassing any kind of communication with these toads. She'd seen them interrogating the Goomba and torturing him when the Goomba wasn't replying to their questions. If they were going to do that to a mere Goomba, what would they do to her? So she ran as fast as she could. She knew that her stamina wasn't that great, but compared to how short these toads were, she was believing that she'd be far faster than them. What she didn't expect was a few fireballs and ice balls to fly past her, blocking her path with flames and ice as she slid to a stop. Looking at the toads behind herself, she found that some of them had vastly different appearances. But the most concerning thing was how two had flaming hands, and another two had frost coming from their mouths. She stepped back fearfully as a toad leaped from the mushroom tops as he swung his spear towards her. Acting on instinct, she ducked under the horizontal swipe of the spear as she grabbed the weapon as the toad overextended and spun around with the toad on the opposite end. All before releasing the weapon, launching the toad and the weapon itself towards his allies and leaping over the fire and running into the nearby forest. This forest wasn't like the mushroom forest she was in, however, it had actual trees, and she ran as fast as she could, all before a massive tree branch had entered her view at the last second. It close-lined her, knocking her to the ground. As she tried to get her bearings back again, she looked to her right and was met with the boot of another toad that smashed right into her temple, knocking her to the ground once more, knocking her out. 0W0? When Izumi woke up, she was lying in a dungeon as her vision swam. Everything was blurred due to her slowly waking up, but she saw two people sitting in chairs in front of the dungeon bars, but they were more blobs, and she could barely hear what they were talking about. Once her vision had completely finished, she saw that they looked Italian from the mustaches on their faces, but she found it even more weird as they wore what she could only guess were plumber outfits. Both wore differing colors. One who was shorter than the other was wearing red undergarments, whilst the blue was an overall that connected to a small golden button. The same was for the taller one, but with green instead of red. "What do we tell the princess?" the red hat-wearing one asked. "I don't know, Mario. For all we know, she could be working for 𝗬𝗲𝗄, the green hat-wearing one replied. Izumi groaned out, catching the two's attention. "Do you know where you are?" the red one asked, his voice very strained. "And no, where am I?" Izumi asked, looking around the dungeon. "You are inside the princess castle dungeon. You attacked the Toad High Guard near their barracks. That was a very stupid of you," the red overalls one stated. "Okay, I just saw them torturing a brown short guy. He wore brown dress shoes," Izumi said, as the two men stared at her in confusion. "That was a Goomba, they aren't very nice," the green hat-wearing man said, very nervously. "From where I stood, the Toads aren't kind either," Izumi retorted. Before the two men could question her further, an explosion occurred from above them all. The two men rushed out of the dungeon area, as Izumi looked around the area as some small pebbles fell above her. Moving out of the way of the small pebbles, she found the door to her dungeon somehow opened, and looking around the area, she found that nobody was there. Taking her chance, she rushed in the opposite direction of where the two men ran and found herself in a side hall of the place that the two men mentioned was a castle dungeon. Running up some nearby stairs, she used the growing tension and fear in her heart to help her navigate through the halls. That was before the wall she was running by had been blasted apart as something had crashed through the nearby wall and into the one that she had crossed. Looking into the hole, She saw that it was a giant yellow turtle with a green shell with a large amount of spikes leaving it. She stared at the giant turtle as he shook his head as he tried to get his bearings before looking at whoever was giving him a weird expression. Looking at the girl, the turtle just stared at her for all but a moment before a cruel smirk came over his face. Walking over to her, Izumi felt her fear begin to grow again as she stumbled back from how each step the giant turtle made had caused a small quake through the floor. Then she heard him speak to her, in a tone that demanded respect. "Are you the one who saved some of my own army?" His voice asked, gruff and very low. "I don't know," Izumi replied as she froze in fear. "You might have seen a few Goombas who were captured by some toads near the Mushroom Kingdom. Is that ringing a bell?" The turtle questioned. "Why, you mean those little weird mushroom people?" Izumi asked, confused. "Yes, they are called Goombas and they are a part of my army," the giant turtle said. "I did buy them time to escape," Izumi said as the turtle nodded. "Come with me, it is clear that you are unwelcome in this castle," the giant turtle said, as Izumi watched him walk through the hole that was made by him. How do I get out of here?" Izumi asked as the turtle looked over his shoulder. "Grab onto one of the spikes on my back. My children by now have probably captured the princess," the giant turtle stated, as Izumi rushed up behind him and grabbed onto a back spike. What do I call you? "I'd rather not call you giant turtle in my head," Izumi asked as the turtle looked at her with a chuckle. "You clearly weren't thinking that, I heard you muttering," the creature said, watching the girl from over his shoulder blush deeply. "And to answer your question, just call me Bowser," he said, before leaping high in the air. "Kaya!" Izumi screamed as wind blasted her up as she held onto the spike of Bowser's shell. "Gaha! Try and get me now, Mario Brothers," Bowser called out, as Izumi briefly saw the two men standing on the ground below. "Sorry to you ask this of you, but where are you taking me?" Izumi asked as Bowser allowed her to get off his back. "We're heading to my home, the volcano world," he said, as his ship took off towards what appeared to be a volcanic world. Izumi was very concerned whether or not she'd be capable of breathing in space, but found that she could actually be able to. It greatly confused her, but as they passed through multiple worlds, she saw the beauty of the place and looked at it in awe. Bowser looked at her from afar and walked up behind her. The small girl was clearly very young from her appearance, but from what her body type showed him, she was very mature looking. If anything, she appeared to be more feminine than the princess herself was, and he could see said princess looking at Izumi with concern. "Young lady, I thank you for helping my forces to escape from the Mushroom Kingdom's hands. And for that, I must ask you, what is your name?" Bowser questioned. "Midoriya Izumi," the young girl said as Bowser looked at the princess in the corner of his eye. The princess was glaring at Izumi as though she had slighted her and her entire family. Bowser couldn't help but smirk at that. He hadn't even done anything to the girl, and she was already trusting him far more than she had the princess of her own kingdom. That was when Bowser nodded at the girl. "That is a good name. I shall call you Izumi though. I don't know why you said your family name first, but it'll be easier for me to remember," Bowser said, as he watched the green-haired girl blush crimson. "Be Bowser-san," Izumi replied as Bowser smiled again. "Welcome to the Koopa Kingdom," Bowser said, placing a palm on her shoulder. "In this world, you will learn what is right and wrong from my perspective. And you will find a place where you belong amongst me and my followers," Bowser said as the princess finally spoke. "Don't listen to him. He's pure evil," the princess called out. "Why not?" Izumi asked, causing the princess to look at her with both fury and confusion. "He's done literally nothing wrong, at least to me," Izumi said, as the princess stared at her exasperatedly. "Are you insane? He's kidnapping me right now? I'm the leader of a kingdom and he's kidnapping me for nefarious deeds," the princess said, as Izumi looked very uncomfortable. "You will keep quiet, princess. Remember, I can kill you if I so wish it," Bowser said as the woman smirked at him. "You wouldn't dare. When Mario and Luigi get here, they will put you in your place," the princess said, as Izumi froze in place as she looked at the nearby forests of World 6 as they flew overhead. Oh, they'll put me in my place. I would like to see when that happens. 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗪 laughed as Izumi looked at the princess. Her blue eyes and very fiery personality caused Izumi to see an uncanny resemblance to someone who very clearly scared her deeply. The princess's face constantly switched from her blue eyes and blonde hair to red eyes and ash blonde hair in the form of an explosion. Izumi's eyes slowly shrunk as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 looked at Izumi with confusion before watching her slowly twitching in growing fear, her chest moving up and down very quickly. It wasn't something he'd seen often in his forces, but at the same time he'd seen it from his sons and daughter whenever they'd lost to Mario and his brother in a fight. This young lady was having a panic attack. Rushing over to her, he placed a clawed hand on her shoulder softly. What he didn't expect was for the girl to react violently to him placing a palm on her shoulder softly, as she flinched hard. 𝗬𝗲𝗪 looked at the princess as she looked at the scene before them both as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 got right into helping the girl calm down from her panic attack. The princess could only blurt out a few words that displayed her clear confusion at what just happened. What the fuck just happened? The princess questioned quietly. 𝗬𝗲𝗪 fretted over Izumi as she continued to spiral into her panic attack. He looked over at the princess with a mock glare before he picked up Izumi and walked over to his room inside of the gigantic ship that was piloted by his men. Softly placing the sobbing girl on the couch inside the room, 𝗬𝗲𝗪 knelt down to be just in her eyesight as the girl trembled softly in front of him. He may be a villain, but he has standards when it comes to those who are suffering. He let a clawed hand reach out to Izumi before he watched her left arm tremble slightly. Okay, so do you want to talk about what you saw? 𝗬𝗲𝗪 asked softly. What happened? Where is 𝗧𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂? Izumi asked, looking around the room fearfully. I don't know who a 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂 is, but just know that it's just me and you in here, 𝗬𝗲𝗪 said, as Izumi stared at him. How do I know this eye isn't a 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗧? Izumi questioned, shrinking her body into the couch. I swear on my life that we are the only ones inside this room. I brought you here because you are currently going through a panic attack, 𝗬𝗲𝗪 said, as he moved to sit next to her. As he sat on the couch, Izumi just sat as ramrod straight as possible as the giant turtle had kept himself still. His entire body then glowed a green and yellow color as his form was replaced from a very scary exterior and replaced with a very handsome one as he appeared far more masculine than his turtle form. His jawline was sharp, but his eyes still held their fiery power within, and his hair was in the shape of a long mohawk that was a deep red in color. His body, however, was just him wearing the giant spiked turtle shell on his torso, and he also wore a deep blue pair of jeans. Does this make you feel better than you were before? 𝗬𝗲𝗪 asked, a soft baritone sound coming from his voice. Please. But why do you kidnap the princess of another kingdom? Izumi asked, as her heart slowly regained its slower heartbeat. I take her because I am deeply in love with her. I love how she counters my very being with the skills and magic she can utilize, 𝗬𝗲𝗪 said, looking up at the ceiling wistfully. So you like her because she's your exact opposite, aside from appearance? Izumi asked softly. Yeah, I only wish to marry her because not only is she my exact opposite in everything I stand for, but if I were to combine both of our kingdoms, then all of our respective kingdoms would be far more capable of thriving in peace, 𝗬𝗲𝗪 said as Izumi thought about it. Why not go for someone else? Izumi asked as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 looked at her. Why would I ever go for someone else? Peach is perfect, 𝗬𝗲𝗪 said, as Izumi shook her head. She's been against this marriage you've tried to set up, right? Izumi asked as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 nodded. But what if she doesn't like you and that way? Izumi asked as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 thought about it. That is a good way to look at it, but we're getting close to my castle. From what I gleaned from your muttering when you were having a panic attack, you wished you could be a hero, correct? 𝗬𝗲𝗪 asked. Why yes, more than anything. But nobody would give me a chance to actually prove my dream, Izumi said as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 thought about it. Does it matter for who you are the hero to? 𝗬𝗲𝗪 asked as Izumi thought about it. So long as the innocent don't get hurt, Izumi said as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 thought about his next answer. What he says next could very well mark her as either an ally or a very crude enemy that he wouldn't like to end the life of. Not to mention that the whole him kidnapping Peach is just to give his sons and daughter a mother like they've always wanted. Especially since he never had any family aside from 𝗵𝗃, the wizard 𝗵𝗃 who raised him from being a child. Looking into the girl's eyes, he found that she was a very honest individual, so having her as an enemy was not the right way to go about it. But if she were to be his enemy, he'd like her to be actually capable of bringing his plans to an end should they ever cross paths and they're enemies. Well, how about this? After you get adjusted to living in my castle and meet my children, I could train you in everything I know, 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗟𝗘 suggested. Why you'd train me in everything you know? Izumi asked, looking at him in shock. Of course, from what I can see, so long as you get some muscle and train hard you can become a hero. Not just for the entire kingdom that I rule, but for the Mushroom Kingdom as well, proving it to those Mario brothers that Princess Peach doesn't need them to protect her. 𝗬𝗲𝗧 said, as the plan was coming to fruition in his head. So long as why your family are nice? I wouldn't mind it, Izumi said as 𝗬𝗲𝗧 smiled at her. He gave her a pat on the head that she felt very confused about as he rubbed her very soft hair for a moment. It caused her to lean into his touch that much more as she realized that in the last 6 years since her mother had died, she hadn't gotten a singular hug or touch of affection that actually made her feel like this. Tears fell from her eyes once more as she reached up to the hand as it tried to move away from her head, and she kept it there for a few more moments, causing 𝗬𝗲𝗧 to look at her in confusion. 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗲. See, can we stay like this a little longer? Izumi asked, looking up at 𝗬𝗲𝗧. I don't see why not, 𝗬𝗲𝗧 said, as he sat back down and pulled the girl into his hip. The two remained like this for the rest of the trip as Izumi slowly felt herself falling asleep. Apparently, when 𝗬𝗲𝗧 remained in one spot for long enough, his body heat was more than enough to lull anyone into a very deep sleep as Izumi struggled to stay awake. 𝗬𝗲𝗧 took note of this as he smirked at Izumi before stating something as her eyes fluttered shut. Have a good sleep, you'll need it for later. 𝗬𝗲𝗧's voice rang out as Izumi fell unconscious. 0W0? Izumi woke up inside of a room where her hair was splayed out behind her head. As she slowly sat upright, she soon found herself staring at a sight that caused her to nearly snort in amusement. The princess who 𝗬𝗲𝗧 had captured was sitting in a birdcage that held her in there. On her face was a very distinct pout as she sat there with a bored expression on her face before noticing that Izumi was waking up and got into a position to try and get the girl to free her. Izumi, however, just watched as Peach just sat at the edge of the cage and looked at her pleadingly. Why are you looking at me like that? Izumi asked, as Peach looked at her with a pleading expression. I need you to help me get out of here. Whatever 𝗬𝗲𝗧 told you in that room is nothing more than a lie, Peach said, as Izumi tilted her head. I had to grow up alone. And because of that I've had to learn how to judge someone based on how they act. From what 𝗬𝗲𝗧 told me in that room, he didn't even lie to my face once, Izumi said, as Peach just let out a furious and exasperated sigh. He is a master manipulator. There is no way that he's as kind as the 𝗵𝗃s and 𝗵𝗲 tribes even say, Peach said, as Izumi shook her head. See, can you please stop trying to get me to be on your side? Your people were seen torturing 𝗵𝗃s, and from my perspective, you're the one invading him, Izumi said, as Peach just stared at her with an exasperated expression. Did he wipe your memory or something? Peach asked in a very angered tone. Like it if you stopped yelling, Izumi said as she moved to leave the room. Wait, please don't go. Help me out of here and I will make sure that you get whatever you wish, Peach said, as Izumi stared at her for a moment. There was no more words between the two as Peach felt that Izumi was about to listen to reason. But Izumi just walked over to some duct tape that somehow made it into this world and taped the woman's mouth shut, as Izumi let out a soft sigh of relief before opening the bedroom door and leaving. Peach had never been so humiliated since she was first kidnapped by someone who was as stubborn as 𝗬𝗲𝗧, but as she sighed, she felt as though it was a losing effort to get Izumi on her side. She thought that bribing the girl into being on her side would work, but apparently the girl couldn't be bought with anything. Of course, she's a 𝗬𝗲𝗧 supporter. Peach grumbled after taking the duct tape off her mouth. With Izumi, the young woman was walking through the massive castle that belonged to 𝗬𝗲. She was in awe of how large the place was, so many towers, so many rooms, and by the time she reached the main hall, she found that 𝗬𝗲 was sitting on his throne as he took care of his kingdom. He was actually taking care of making new laws and keeping an eye on his forces by informing a very high-ranking official in his army how much more people he wanted in his army by the end of the month. The 𝗬𝗲 who had been writing this information down nodded and rushed off towards the entrance to the castle. 𝗬𝗲 then glanced over at Izumi as the girl entered the area near him as he turned his attention to her. The clothing he'd given her was something that she'd never thought she could wear in her life. What she wore was many times better than the black 𝗬𝗂𝗫 dress that she wore to her school. It was a long black dress that showed a little bit of cleavage, but at the same time let her hair flow out behind her as the dress black color really brought out her emerald eyes. 𝗬𝗲 gave the girl a knowing nod of approval of the dress as Izumi moved over to see a smaller version of 𝗬𝗲's more scary form. "Who are you?" the little 𝗬𝗲 asked with a tilt of his head. "Junior, gather your siblings. It's time for you to meet a new ally of sorts," 𝗬𝗲 said as Junior nodded. "Of course, father. I hope she's more like you," Junior called out, rushing out of the room. "Sorry for him. He's very excitable when he finds out he's getting a new family member," 𝗬𝗲 said as Izumi shook her head. "I haven't had a family for years. I'll be nice to 𝗧𝗵𝗲 again," Izumi said, blushing slightly. "Well then, just know that once you meet the 𝗬𝗄𝗫𝗍𝗫lings, your training will begin soon after," 𝗬𝗲 said, as Izumi nodded. A few minutes passed by as a large group of children entered the room. Izumi felt as though 𝗬𝗲 entrusting most of his army to being under his children's command was endearing a bit, but at the same time he was placing his children in harm's way. That was when she found that each and every one of them appeared to be very similar in appearance to 𝗬𝗲 himself, at least in his scary appearance kind of way. Each one looked vastly different from one another, and it appeared as though there was only one female within the troop of 𝗬𝗄𝗫𝗍𝗫lings. That was when Junior spoke up to his father. "I've brought my siblings, Dad," Junior said, as 𝗬𝗲 let out a happy smile. "I've managed to find a human who wishes to join our kingdom. So as tradition, I hope to bring her within our family. Whatever position she wishes will be hers until she can go on her own journey of becoming a hero," 𝗬𝗲 said, as Junior tilted his head. "Then shouldn't she be our enemy? Why would you want her to join us?" Junior asked, confused. "Because it's the right thing to do." Peach and her forces looked at her as though she were an enemy of the Mushroom Kingdom. "So I am taking her on as a protégé of sorts like I did with each one of you. She will learn everything that I have and her position within the kingdom will be chosen by then," 𝗬𝗲 said, as Izumi nodded with a shy wave. "And nice to meet you all. And my name is Midoriya Izumi," Izumi said, bowing to the 𝗬𝗄𝗫𝗍𝗫lings. "She's bowing to us. The Mario brothers never do that to us even though we're royalty," the 𝗬𝗄𝗫lings all stated. "Is it not customary to be bow here? It is where I live," Izumi asked as Junior thought about it. "Father, why not make her similar to a mother?" Junior asked as Izumi blushed madly. I don't know about that, Junior-san. I couldn't possibly do that," Izumi said, waving her hands around in the air. "Junior, I would like to kindly ask you to not mention this again. If she wishes to be in that position, that is all her decision, but her wishes right now is to become a hero. And far be it from me to deny someone their dreams. I've trained each and every 𝗬𝗄𝗫 within my kingdom in the ways that I have been taught. And tomorrow we will begin your training," 𝗬𝗲 said, as Izumi nodded. As 𝗬𝗲 went over the whole schedule for Izumi's training of what she should be preparing for, Izumi noticed that there was a lot of food being placed on this schedule. It was something that she couldn't have an abundance of back in her old world, but at the same time maybe nobody would get mad at her for eating a bit more than usual. She gave 𝗬𝗲 a confused expression at the food part as he explained himself in detail. "If you're worried about the food, I was only placing it there so that it could help you build muscle. You can't protect the kingdom from threats if you don't have the muscle in order to protect yourself," 𝗬𝗲 said, as Izumi nodded along. Unknown to the two of them, as they looked over the schedule that the king had made, Junior and his siblings watched the two talk. They spoke in hushed tones that the Koopalings had been very confused about, especially since they kept talking about training and making sure Izumi was fully prepared for her dreams. Junior then spoke to his siblings, just to get them all to leave the two to their own devices. Leave the lovebirds alone. We should train ourselves so that if father tries to have us go up against her, that we should be prepared for it, Junior said, as the others nodded and followed him happily. Junior watched as the two talk more like a couple would, like his father had stated many times in the past. And he couldn't help but wonder why his father hasn't even thought about taking this young girl as his wife instead of Peach. She was far more receptive to his attention than Peach ever was. Not only that, but the girl was actually listening to his plans as well as making upgrades to them to make them far more adaptable to whatever the Mario brothers can do against them. With Izumi and Bowser, the two were going over the plan that Bowser had on hand. He stated that if he were to be defeated by Mario and his brother, then he'd have 𝗵𝗃 increase his size through magic and chase the two through his magma-filled dungeon. And by the time he reached them, he'd place the two brothers into the magma pit that he would be standing in. And Izumi criticized Bowser's plan by helping him make the way to the princess far more difficult, as she made sure that no matter what the brothers would do, they would become far more injured by the time they'd reach Bowser. Not to mention she told Bowser to at least hold on to a couple of the magic plants/fruits/items that could increase his already terrifying strength. The Turtle King had nodded along and adjusted his plans to meet those specifications and found that this kind of plan was going to be far easier to implement. He even got rid of all those old machines that his people created and replaced them with weapons that Izumi informed him of. That was when Izumi thought about Bowser's overall plan. "Are you trying to fail?" Izumi asked as Bowser looked at her. "What are you talking about?" he questioned. "All these plans rely on Mario and Luigi making it to your world as well as fighting through your forces to get to you. It's almost as though you know the Mario brothers will be more than capable of reaching you and defeating you," Izumi said, looking at Bowser. "They've been a thorn in my side for years. Ever since the two first appeared in this world, they've been stopping my plans of reclaiming all of my lost land. That damn princess has them taking my land back from me each and every time I kidnap her, but by the time I get prepared to do something to her, the brothers just appear," Bowser said as he rubbed his forehead. Why not make a trap for them? If you know they will manage to reach your home when you are preparing to do something to Peach, why not have a trap set up for them?" Izumi asked as Bowser thought about it. "What kind of trap should I have? The two can quite literally jump their way out of any trap I lay out for them. And that is if they don't use those mushrooms that increase the height they can jump," Bowser said as Izumi thought about it. "Can't you make a large moat of lava to prevent them from getting close?" Izumi asked. "They can then use the magic cape that allows them to fly." "A moat wouldn't work," Bowser said as he racked his brain for an answer. "Why not just eliminate the princess? They wouldn't kill you, right?" Izumi asked as Bowser shook his head. "Those two humans cannot kill me. I am impossible to kill, since if they kill my body, my bones will just reanimate as soon as that happens," Bowser said, as Izumi shivered slightly. "The only way I can see you getting them to stop attacking is to stop kidnapping the princess," Izumi said as Bowser thought about that as well. "I could do that, but I want my children to have a mother figure. She's the only human who I've fallen in love with since I've been born," Bowser said as he sighed. "I'm 34 years old and I just can't seem to figure out who would want to date me. The princess is a no-go since I kidnap her all the time. Princess Daisy just is too much for me to handle, and there's no other human who really likes me in the way I want," Bowser said, covering his eyes in tiredness. If there was someone that Izumi had thought he looked similar to, it would have been the tired expression on the symbol of peace. At least when he was in his more mortal appearance, since the man looked like a mere brush of wind could knock him over and he'd keel over and die from it. And looking at the face of Bowser, she immediately sat on the ground next to the throne, and with a very massive blush on her face, she beckoned the Turtle King over. "See, could you transform into your human form?" Izumi asked, causing Bowser to look at her in confusion. "How long is this going to take?" he asked curiously. It shouldn't take too long, depending on you," Izumi said, as the taller man knelt in front of her. "What should I do then?" he asked, humoring her. What he didn't expect was for her to pull him down and place the back of his head on her lap. She then began to dig her fingers through his mohawk as he felt her hit spots of his head that have itched for years with such ease that he immediately was putty in her hands. His face went from confusion to a massive blushing expression, to complete bliss as he slowly felt himself falling asleep on the girl's lap as she messed with his head of hair as well as scratched his shell slightly. She even managed to scratch his horns atop his head in just the way he liked. It was soothing for the 𝗵𝗃 king. "I'm giving you about 15 minutes to an hour for this. Afterwards I will continue with my plans," Bowser said as his eyes fluttered shut. "Oh, of course, why your majesty," Izumi said as Bowser spoke again in a hushed tone. "Just call me Bowser," he said before sleep called to him. "Oh, Bowser-san," Izumi said with a small smile on her face. As time passed in the throne room of King 𝗵𝗃, Bowser's underlings had entered and left. Izumi taking charge of the place whilst he slept and taking care of some of his jobs of making laws that helped the populace of the kingdom as a whole. She even made sure to create a small business that would allow for healthcare for those who lived in the 𝗵𝗃 kingdom as a whole. Smiling down at the sleeping king of the 𝗵𝗃 tribe, she rubbed her hands around the king's mohawk as she scratched him just right every time. When a full 2 hours had come and gone, Bowser woke up to find Izumi smiling down at him. Sitting upright once more, he glanced around the room to find it completely empty of everything. No guards, no people watching him, and especially no Mario brothers who could come to attack him. Looking back at Izumi, the girl smiled at him a little bit more as he stood up and transformed back into his kingly form. "Thank you for the nap. I never knew a lap was enough to knock me out," Bowser said, stretching his limbs. It was nothing, Bowser, though I think Junior might be making rumors about us," Izumi said with a sweat drop. "What is he doing this time?" he asked, as Izumi looked at a nearby wall. Walking over to it, Bowser saw something that he wasn't prepared for. It was a painted picture of him sleeping on Izumi's lap, but around it was a heart that inside said these words: "Daddy has found his wife." Never before has Bowser ever felt such humiliation from his own offspring. Izumi stood out in the field outside of Bowser's castle. She had been in this world for more than a couple of days by now. She looked at the surrounding area as she watched Bowser walk towards her with purpose, and for some reason she noticed he was holding a flower that looked very weird. It was small, but it had a red outline with orange in the middle. It was also smiling at her as it bounced in his clawed hand. He stopped in front of her as his towering visage blocked out the sun for her as he spoke to her in a very soft but caring tone. "All right, Izumi, this is what is known as a fire flower. It grants the person who accepts it into their body the ability to use fireballs and any other tricks you can think of. The only thing we know about them is that you can only throw fireballs, and the same is for their opposite elemental flower, the ice flower. Now try and accept this flower into your body," Bowser said, as Izumi reached out and touched the flower. "Okay, so I just place it near my sea chest?" Izumi asked as Bowser nodded. Placing the flower at her chest, she felt the flower's warmth as it flowed throughout her entire body. And her form glowed an ominous red color before she was revealed wearing a new outfit that wasn't the dress that Bowser had given her to wear. 𝗵𝗃 had made it in her specific numbered sizes. And as she looked at what she now looked like, she was wearing a short skirt that was red in color and a tank top that was a deep orange to match the power that she was given. As she looked up at Bowser, the villainous king of the 𝗵𝗃 clan had smirked at how her eyes had gone from their deep green to a bright yellow. She moved her limbs slightly as she felt the power moving throughout her limbs without any problems. Looking up at Bowser, the Turtle King had smirked at her before he spoke once more, but this time in a way that showed pride. "All right, now then try and use a fireball," he said, pointing at a rock wall. Is that a 𝗧𝗵𝗵? Izumi asked as Bowser shook his head. "It's just a bunch of rocks," he said, as Izumi nodded. Placing her hands together, a small flame was beginning to form before it began to spiral around in a circle. Pulling back her right arm, she threw the fireball at the wall of rock that Bowser had created from the dirt, and was amazed when the fireball had completely melted the rock into a crystalline state. Walking over to it, he clicked his claws on the crystal before calling 𝗂𝗵𝗃 over to see what kind of crystal was made, only for 𝗂𝗵𝗃 to state that it was a deep slate crystal. In awe of the new crystal, Bowser used his magic to create a necklace out of it and gave it to Izumi, who stared at it in shock and awe. "This is a gift for you, young one. You're already showing signs that you are quite adaptable with the fire flower. Do you have parents who were very close to flames?" Bowser asked, genuinely curious. "And my dad, he had a quirk called flamethrower. It allowed him to breathe fire through H's mouth," Izumi said as Bowser nodded. "You have a great affinity for fire as well as fire magic. If you wish to learn how to utilize these skills, I'd love for you to help me in my fight against the Mario brothers," Bowser said as Izumi thought about it. "Aren't they the heroes?" Izumi asked as Bowser shrugged his shoulders. "They are the heroes for the Mushroom Kingdom. For the Koopa clan, I am their hero since I am the one who protects and trains them. They have been specifically trained to take on the weaknesses of their allies. Where one fails in strength, another more than makes up for it through magic. One who is weak with magic, they more than make up for it in speed and strength, etc." Bowser explained as Izumi thought about it. She then moved away from Bowser, causing the Turtle King to think she was not going to be friendly. That was before she took a deep breath as she looked to the sky, and Bowser felt something akin to worry build up inside his heart, one that he kept hidden from everyone, even the Mario brothers, as the girl's throat began to glow an ominous orange color. Looking confused at what she was doing for a moment, he was baffled when the girl released a massive scream that was followed by a beam of green and red fire that blasted out towards the sky. Bowser had to take a step back as he looked back at Izumi, who stumbled a bit before hacking up some saliva. Rushing over to her, he also grabbed a pail of water as he passed it on to her, as she immediately placed her entire face into it as he watched her gulp down the water as fast as possible. Once she pulled her face out of the water, Bowser couldn't help but admire the expression she held as her eyes were wide open, her yellow eyes contrasting extremely beautifully against her forest green hair, which had flecks of orange and red in it due to the fire flower. "She looks beautiful," he thought to himself before shaking his gigantic head. "You okay? It's not a good idea to try something like that," Bowser said, rubbing her back. What did the flames look like?" Izumi asked, coughing slightly. "They were a beautiful green and red, and were nearly as powerful as my own fire blasts," Bowser said with a smile. "My dad could breathe fire, but his was always orange," Izumi said as she took small breaths now. "Maybe next time you shouldn't try that for a while. Not until your body gets used to the fire flower's powers that are coursing through your veins," Bowser said, rubbing Izumi's hair. "Why, sensei?" Izumi said, stars in her eyes. "All right, do you know how to fight hand-to-hand?" Bowser questioned as Izumi frowned. "Each time I tried back home, I would get beaten down for it," Izumi said, rubbing her left arm. "Well, you don't need to tell me about it if you feel unable to. Just know that if you wish to talk about something about your past, I am always here to lend an ear, or well, whatever I have that counts for ears anyway," Bowser said, trying to bring her spirit up. Thank you, Bowser-san. So what do I need to do in order to learn how to fight PR properly?" Izumi asked as Bowser smiled. "You see that dummy over there?" he asked, as Izumi nodded. "I want you to try and punch it as hard as you can," Bowser said, as Izumi walked over to it. He had her give up the power since that would also enhance her physical stats as well. Couldn't gauge her current strength without having the power of the flower increasing her own strength. As she stood next to it, he watched as Izumi moved into a stance that was very odd. Before moving closer to her whilst holding a stick, softly he moved her legs into the right positions as he instructed her on how to place her stance. She listened to every word he gave as for the rest of the day. He taught her how to throw a punch, throw a kick, as well as mix in martial prowess and combat intelligence with how she fought. The Mario brothers will not give you the time of day in order to defend yourself. So you need to strike first and strike fast. Make sure that they can't think through whatever plan they can come up with. They might be heroes of another kingdom, but if you are to become a hero for my people, you will need to fight and think whilst on the fly. Koopa troop, fight her but not at full strength. We need her to learn how to fight on the fly without overthinking anything," Bowser said, As Izumi entered the combat stance he showed her. 0W0? Hours of learning to fight on the fly that day later, Izumi was panting heavily as she laid on her back on the ground. 𝗬𝗲𝗄 moved closer to her as he sat next to her prone form as she looked up at him with a smile on her face. He didn't know why she smiled at him, but for some reason it allowed his mind to calm down. He looked at the sky before he decided to transform into his humanoid state as he laid on his back next to her. The two stared at the slowly setting sun as Izumi breathed softly next to him. That was amazing. I learned so much. Izumi said, happily giggling a little bit. I would hope you'd learned something from that. They are one of my foot soldiers, such as the Goombas. When you become strong enough to be a part of the army, would you like to become one of my generals? 𝗬𝗲𝗄 asked, looking at her. I don't know. I'm not as sure whether or not my P presence will assist you in your fight against the Mario brothers. Izumi said, looking at the sky with a sad expression. Don't say that. You are not a burden on my forces. And do not think that all this training that I've been giving you today is something that I'm doing to get something out of you either. I've seen Goombas, Koopas, and Koopa wizards suffering from whatever ailments that you've suffered. I know when someone believes that they are a burden on those around them. 𝗬𝗲𝗄 said, looking at Izumi with a soft glare. I've lived in my life thinking that I wasn't special. My friend, Ken? He was the only friend I had growing up. It wasn't until recently that I realized what kind of person he truly was. But it was him and everyone from my home world that made me think this way. And I don't know how to stop it. Izumi said, tears falling from her eyes. Then you try and move on. Come to terms with your previous life and live a new one as you make a fresh new start in this world. I will be here to help you along the way to becoming a hero that you so desire. 𝗬𝗲𝗄 said with a smile. Why you should smile more often. Why you really show others your true colors that way. Izumi said as 𝗬𝗲𝗄 thought about it. Smile more often, huh? Maybe I should. 𝗬𝗲𝗄 thought to himself as he stood up. Well, we should get back inside. Don't want you to get a cold while staying out here for too long, not to mention dinner is in a few. 𝗬𝗲𝗄 said, stretching his limbs. Okay, do you have any different clothing that I can wear? Izumi asked, rubbing the dirt and dust from the dress. What would you like? 𝗬𝗲𝗄 questioned as he transformed into his turtle form. Could you please make a t-shirt and shorts? At least a couple pairs of them? Izumi asked softly. I will see what I and 𝗵𝗃 can do about it. Come on, we must continue with your evening now. 𝗬𝗲𝗄 said as he walked away, Izumi not far behind. Over the next few months, after the Mario brothers had saved the princess whilst he was distracted with Izumi's training, 𝗬𝗲𝗄 and his people continued to train Izumi to the best of their abilities, what with Izumi learning different kinds of magic that made her a jack of all trades, master of none kind of opponent. She was seen in the training grounds outside as 𝗬𝗲𝗄 walked to the area to see how she was doing. Apparently, he wasn't told about what her plans for today as she had been holding a gigantic sword in her hands. What the hell? 𝗬𝗲𝗄 yelled, eyes bulging from their sockets, causing Izumi to immediately drop the weapon in fear. Kaya! Izumi screamed in fear as she dropped the weapon into the ground. Why are you training with a giant sword? 𝗬𝗲𝗄 called out, rushing to her. I was just swinging it around for strength training. Izumi said, as 𝗬𝗲𝗄 just sighed. I could have helped you with it had you just given me a chance. 𝗬𝗲𝗄 said, as Izumi just sheepishly apologized. Sorry, sir. I didn't want to wake you up. Izumi said, looking incredibly guilty. Don't apologize, you were just trying to increase your strength training regimen, correct? 𝗬𝗲𝗄 asked, as Izumi nodded. Then look no further. If you wish to train your strength, then you can use me as your weight training. 𝗬𝗲𝗄 said as Izumi thought about it. How much do you weigh anyway? Izumi asked as she silently thanked the gods that she didn't stutter. I weigh just about 2,600 pounds. In other words, just a little over 1 ton. If you can manage to lift me by the end of your training even when I'm in my gigantic form, then you will be prepared to fight Mario and his brother Luigi. 𝗬𝗲𝗄 said, as Izumi nodded. So how do I even lift you? Izumi asked as she stared at his turtle form. That is something that 𝗵𝗃 will be required to do. Continue your training with that blade, The better you are at swinging one, you might get yourself a blade of your own to use against those pesky plumbers. 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗪 said, growling slightly. Sure thing 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗪-sensei. Izumi said, smiling at him. Just call me 𝗬𝗲𝗧, you calling me sensei makes me feel old. I'm only 34. 𝗬𝗲𝗧 grumbled as Izumi apologized whilst bowing multiple times. With that, the king of the 𝗬𝗃𝗃 clan left the girl to her own devices as she went back into her hardcore training. The funny thing about that interaction was the fact that 𝗬𝗲𝗧 Jr. had informed Izumi to try training herself with an incredibly heavy blade since he wanted her to have something else to rely upon aside from magic like him and the other 𝗬𝗃𝗃lings. It was something intrinsic to him and his siblings, not to her, and he also wanted her to fulfill the whole saying of Jack of all trades, master of none kind of metaphors. And as the days passed by without 𝗬𝗲𝗧 coming out to help her with her strength training, Izumi was beginning to think that he'd forgotten. But about a week after he'd caught her training with wielding a blade, he walked out with 𝗵𝗃𝗃 not too far behind as the right hand to 𝗬𝗲𝗧 himself smirked at Izumi. Something that the young woman returned but felt a little worried about the smirk directed at her, as it was far more sadistic than 𝗬𝗲𝗧 when he physically trained Izumi in hand-to-hand. Alright, young one. This day you are going to see if you can lift me even a millimeter off the ground. It will show if your strength training with that heavy blade was working. 𝗬𝗲𝗧 explained as Izumi nodded. How much did that sword you used weigh? 𝗵𝗃𝗃 questioned as he waved his wand in the air. I think when 𝗬𝗲𝗧 Jr. told me about it, he said it was around double of my own weight. Izumi supplied as 𝗵𝗃𝗃 nodded. Your body has been regaining some muscle that it had lost in the years that you grew up in your world. How you didn't realize that you were being starved by your caretaker I have no idea of, but currently your weight at the moment is only around 150 pounds. So that blade is only around 300, which means that you're going to need a lot more strength if you're going to be capable of lifting 𝗬𝗲𝗧. But that's fine, my magic is used to support my allies and the king when things go awry. 𝗵𝗃𝗃 said, waving his wand in the air and thrusting his magic at her. As Izumi covered her face due to the bright light of the magic, she felt something occur to her body. She felt herself increase in height but keep the same measurements of her original size as she opened her eyes once more to see that she'd grown a full foot in height. She was originally around 5 feet 4 inches, but now she could see that she was 6 feet 4 inches in height as she stared at 𝗬𝗲𝗧, who smirked at her. Let's begin the training, little one, 𝗬𝗲𝗧 said as he still towered over her. For the next few hours, Izumi was shown doing her very best to lift 𝗬𝗲𝗧 from the ground. The giant turtle had laid himself on the ground with his back to it as the young woman did her very best in order to lift as much as she could as her muscles that were barely forming began to cramp in pain. Once she'd gotten herself some breaks in between the training sessions, 𝗵𝗃𝗃 would change the type of magic in order to try and keep Izumi on her toes when they fought hand-to-hand. She had gotten to the point that when he'd used his teleportation magic it was either to move away from her or to move behind her. His hits weren't all that hard, but they were no joke either. By the end of the day Izumi was holding her knees as she panted heavily once more. Her hair was all frazzled, and she had scuffs and bruises on her arms and her cheek as sweat fell down the side of her face. 𝗬𝗲𝗧 took in her appearance as he nodded before telling 𝗵𝗃𝗃 to leave and have the cooks prepare dinner. Walking over to Izumi, the young woman had now gone back to her height of 5 feet 4 inches and was stumbling towards him as he lifted her from the ground and carried her towards the castle. You did great for a long day of trying to lift my body as well as fight me hand-to-hand with 𝗵𝗃𝗃 adjusting my body to the size needed to dodge, 𝗬𝗲𝗧 said, as Izumi nodded. It was an honor to meet 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃-san, Izumi said, as 𝗬𝗲𝗧 chuckled. Are you going to call 𝗵𝗃-sensei as well? 𝗬𝗲𝗧 quipped. Do not make me think about that. I might. Izumi retorted as 𝗬𝗲𝗧 stopped for a moment to glance at her. What? Did I do something wrong? Izumi asked, a little scared. That's the first time you've ever retorted to a joke of mine. You'll fit right in with the 𝗬𝗃𝗃 clan, no doubt about it, he said, smiling at her with a very welcome feeling in Izumi's chest. Near the end of the day, all of the 𝗬𝗃𝗃lings were sleeping in their bedroom chambers. Izumi was shown in her room created for her by 𝗵𝗃𝗃 and 𝗬𝗲𝗧, and she was holding a large painting wrap as she placed it on the wooden holder as she pulled out the colors she'd wanted to use. Using a paintbrush that was small enough to be used by her, She began to paint the entire kingdom of the 𝗵𝗃 clan that she could remember over the last few months of exploring with 𝗬𝗲𝗏 when she was in the beginning stages of her training. She was in the middle of painting the kingdom when the door opened without her noticing as a small shadow watched the girl paint. As the young woman continued to paint, she decided to draw 𝗬𝗲𝗏 in the front of his castle with a smile on his face as his forces stood behind him in very intimidating positions. Once she had drawn 𝗬𝗲𝗏 and his forces behind him, she had begun to paint the picture of the 𝗵𝗃 king in the most intimidating colors that had made her think of his most powerful form. Something that she liked to call his fury state, where his body was entirely black in color, his eyes lost their pupils, and his hair was an even deeper hue of crimson. She smiled at the painting as she felt something tug on her shorts as she looked down to see 𝗬𝗲𝗏 Jr. staring at the painting. Looking at the small 𝗵𝗃, she lifted him onto her lap as she painted further with the small 𝗵𝗃 watching in awe. Eventually the image was completely finished as she set 𝗬𝗲𝗏 Jr. next to her on the ground as she looked at it before smiling at the painting before giving the young 𝗵𝗃 some attention. "Did you need anything, Junior?" Izumi asked softly. How did you learn to paint like that?" Well, I guess you could say that I am self-taught. I needed a skill to become a hero in my world, so I fell to analysis and drawing, Izumi said with a nervous chuckle. "Can you teach me?" Junior asked, looking at Izumi. I wouldn't say that I'm all that good. It takes a lot of tea time in order to become a master at drawing and painting," Izumi said, looking embarrassed. So you won't?" Junior asked, small tears forming in his eyes. "Are you sure that you want me as your tea teacher for this?" Izumi asked worriedly. "Your painting is amazing. I want to learn everything I can from you," Junior called out happily with stars in his eyes. Then I guess I can teach some things to you. But I think it's time for bed," Izumi said, lifting the small 𝗵𝗃 into her arms. She was not aware of the fact that Junior was feeling an extreme amount of warmth from the hug the girl gave him. Almost a motherly kind of warmth, in the moment as Junior nodded at her as she carried him all the way to his bedroom, that he gave directions to. By the time she placed him in his bed and covered him up, she gave him a kiss on his forehead before saying good night to the small 𝗵𝗃. "Oyasumi, Junior-kun," Izumi said, as Junior scrunched his nose. "What does that mean?" "Oyasumi," Junior asked as Izumi smiled at him. Oyasumi means good night in Japanese. "It's my native tongue," Izumi said, smiling at the small 𝗵𝗃ling. "Oh, Oyasumi to you too, mother," Junior said, as Izumi's face went from a smile to confusion before settling on acceptance. When she left the bedroom, she let out a sigh of happiness. She'd never felt accepted by anyone, and with Junior calling her mother, it made her heart soar. Now that someone viewed her in a position of a family, she felt a small piece of her own heart, something that had gone missing since her mother died and her father abandoning her. It filled a small portion of what that remaining space in her heart was, and she walked back to her bedroom as she found her painting. Signing her name in the bottom left corner of it, she lifted it from the wooden holder and left the room to place it on the wall within the castle. With 𝗬𝗲𝗏, the king was in his throne room as he looked over some more laws that had to be instated for his people. He was so focused on the law paper in his hand that he nearly missed Izumi coming into view from the corner of his vision, and as he looked up from the paper in his hand he watched as she found a ladder, climbed up it to a nearby wall that was missing a painting, due to one of the fights 𝗬𝗏𝗏 and Mario had in the past destroying it and placing a new painting that was framed, right where it used to be. As soon as she left, he walked over to the painting itself. Looking at what the painting foretold, he couldn't help the smile that came to his face as he saw what Izumi envisioned the 𝗵𝗃 clan in her view. It showed him in his true form, his turtle form that is, and it was a deep black color with his spikes being crimson red on the tips with the same color for his hair. The 𝗵𝗃lings and Junior were shown next to him in intimidating positions that showed how dangerous they really were. The 𝗵𝗃 clan army as a whole stood behind them, all creating an intimidating presence that represented his entire clan of 𝗵𝗃s. I never knew she was an artist as well. I hope she teaches Junior how to paint far better than what he'd been taught by me, 𝗬𝗲𝗏 said to himself. 𝗵𝗃, make sure that this law is instated into the parchment of our clan's laws. I want the 𝗵𝗃s to know true freedom. Bowser said, as he smiled at the painting basking in its glory. It's only a matter of time until I try and kidnap the princess again. I just only hope that Izumi doesn't think less of me for wanting to marry that woman. Bowser thought to himself, sadly feeling conflicted about this thought in general. That was when a new thought occurred to him. What if I don't want to marry Peach anymore? Bowser and his underlings were moving about the palace in a hurry. Their plans of taking the princess were coming about once more, and they were setting up the other worlds that led to his own taking them over and placing those of his family in charge of them. Bowser had no plans of what he'd be having Izumi doing, as he oversaw her training leading up until now, as she was showing extreme promise with her training. She was capable of lifting him off the ground in his turtle form just a foot before she'd need to drop him due to her back failing to hold her steady. And boy, was that another problem. As it turned out, after having her train for the last 7 months under his supervision, she had grown into quite the woman. Bowser had been up at certain nights thinking about her now womanly figure before he shrugged it off as his slightly perverted mind getting the better of him. But then his mind came back stating that since she was the consenting party, she'd probably wouldn't mind him looking at her before he went back against that thought. Although, this meant that she could prove her loyalty to him and his cause now that she was strong enough to take on the Mario brothers with both her magic and pure strength. Had he been her adoptive father and helped her grow, he would have been proud of her quick progress. The last time someone was having him be this prideful in their progress as one of his own was Junior, as he had shown the sheer power as well as might that he could grow into when Bowser dies long after his son takes over the kingdom. Nodding to himself, he wasn't aware of Izumi entering his war room as she was actively searching for him as she rushed over to his very stressed form. He had taken to only showing his humanoid form whenever she was around, and why he did this surprised him as he didn't really understand why. Bowser-san, are you alright? You seem to be really stressed. Izumi asked, and without a stutter. I'm fine, Izumi, I've just been planning on kidnapping the princess again, Bowser said, as Izumi tilted her head. Why would you need to kidnap her? She asked. Because it's the only way that she'll listen to me. She's tried to fight me many times in the past with her heart magic, the very same magic that turned some of my clan into toads, Bowser said, growling softly. He felt her rub his arm before feeling a soft sensation taking over his right arm as he looked at her. She was shown hugging his arm as her breasts squeezed tightly against his bicep as a blush came over his face as he shook his head at her. Well, what happens when you kidnap the princess? Izumi asked, as Bowser responded to her question. The Mario brothers come after her to save her. I'm never doing anything that would place her life in jeopardy, so I don't know why those two think that I plan on killing her. All I want is to give my children a mother to look after them all, something that I wasn't gifted with when I grew up, Bowser stated, looking at the ground. If she continues to deny your love to her, I'm sure that you'll find the woman who loves you for you, Izumi said, smiling at him. Well, the only woman in this world that even likes me is you, Bowser said, looking into her eyes. What he never expected from her was her face to erupt into a massive blush as she looked away whilst using one of her hands to twirl her hair. She looked incredibly embarrassed about him saying that, and Bowser had to kick himself in the ass mentally as he knew that she probably didn't like him in the way that he was feeling was right. She then spoke to him in a tone that was all but a whisper. I like you because you gave me a chance? She said, but in a small whisper. And nobody's ever given me a chance? Izumi reinstated as Bowser really began to have second thoughts about his kidnapping of Princess Peach. Should I even go through with this mission I have? He asked in a moment of vulnerability. Just do what you think is right, Izumi said, before continuing. I'll follow you through whatever problems that arise, Izumi stated, rubbing his arm before walking away. As Bowser watched her walking away, he couldn't stop his eyes from lowering from her beautiful green curly hair and fall onto her rear. Watching as it bobbed from side to side as she left the room entirely, and he felt his throat dry out before he looked over at 𝗵𝗃, who was watching the whole thing in confusion before a knowing smile erupted on his face. He didn't talk about it and focused on the plan to kidnap Peach again as he added Izumi's presence into his forces as well as a power-up for her to utilize against the Mario brothers should they come across her. As Bowser looked over these plans that 𝗵𝗃 had come up with, He couldn't help but be glad for Izumi's genius assisting 𝗂𝗵𝗃 in making a plan like this. Her intelligence was something that he'd never take for granted, as she was the one thing that kept him from going off the deep end in terms of his villainous ways. In a way, she was keeping him from becoming worse as a villain and more of an anti-hero character, something that 𝗂𝗵𝗃 had taken note of. But he felt it was not a problem since Bowser would still be a villain to the Mario brothers. But at the same time, he'd be an ally they could rely on when a threat more terrifying than Bowser were to show up. "So my liege, what are your thoughts on these plans?" 𝗂𝗵𝗃 asked, his knowing smile still on his face. "I'm not sure whether or not I should be marrying Peach or Izumi at this point," Bowser said, wholly honest. "Well then, if she says no once more, then you will have your answer about who you should really spend time with," 𝗂𝗵𝗃 said, as Bowser glanced at the wizard. "You've raised me from childhood. Was your plan for me to become a major threat to the Mushroom Kingdom?" Bowser asked as he stared at the plans. 𝗂𝗵𝗃 was about to leave the room when Bowser asked him this. The wizard stayed quiet as he thought about his answer. It was extremely obvious. Bowser was supposed to be the king of the Koopas, never be a villain that he'd grown up to be. He still supported the villainous turtle since he didn't have another family that he could call his own as of right now, so he gave Bowser the full truth. "You were never raised to be a villain. You were raised to become the best version of yourself that you could be. I was only there to support you in your dreams of grandeur. Because a true parent would be there to help their child achieve what they themselves dream to become," 𝗂𝗵𝗃 said before leaving. Bowser stayed quiet as he stood in his war room, quiet and somber. All before a smirk came over his face as he left the room with the same smile, one that represented that he knew what he wanted to do. Well, he'd need to spend time before making his final decision with the woman, but he had to get his plans over and done with, lose to the Mario brothers and allow them to keep the princess forever. He knew that his love for the woman was unnatural. He'd fallen in love with her because she was his natural opposite in terms of everything that he was, not to mention magic-wise. Once he stood outside of his castle, he found Izumi standing nearby as he smirked at her. She smiled happily at his own smile as he spoke to his people. "Those within my kingdom, this will be the last time we take Princess Peach from her castle. I have come to the knowledge that she may not like me as much as I have thought she would. I had originally thought that opposites attracted one another. But I was dreadfully wrong in that department. So we will make Mario and his brother fight to bring her back to her kingdom safe and sound, and it will all start with us kidnapping the princess like we usually do," Bowser said, a happy smile on his face. The Koopas were wondering what made their king so happy, but they were fine with it. The longer he was happy, the more he would protect them from any and all threats that came to their world. 0W0? Standing on a ship that Bowser had given her, Izumi wore some clothing that matched what she viewed herself as right now. A hero who will protect the Koopa Kingdom to their last breath. She had been wearing a green skin-tight suit that had clung to her figure, accentuating her features quite nicely. Her wrists held gauntlets that allowed her to channel the fire flower into them to allow her to utilize its power in her fists and wrists. Her legs were gifted gauntlets as well, as they allowed her to land heavy blows that would surely damage both brothers with such damage that they'd be feeling it later on. Over her face was a mask that covered her true identity, and the only thing that could be seen was her eyes, as their deep green colors stood out the most. Her clothing was green all over, but it had some blue and white tints to the gauntlets on her form. The face mask covering the lower portion of her face had been made to handle the full power of a power star blast that Bowser could produce with his flames that were near plasma, the fourth state of matter itself. She was happy that Bowser gave her this kind of treatment, as she felt she could take on anyone now, but wouldn't let that kind of overconfidence devolve into arrogance. "I'm going to be the #1 hero. I'll make even All Might acknowledge me as his better." A familiar childlike voice rang out in her head. "Why would you turn on me, Kakin?" Izumi thought as she remembered that day. Her ship had reached the limits of the Mushroom Kingdom as she landed on the last castle of the area that had been created by Bowser himself. For her to sit in and wait for Mario and his brother to arrive. She knew that Bowser's son, who had a light blue mohawk on his head, would be their first enemy and that they wouldn't believe that she would come right after. She was the backup plan if they managed to defeat Larry first, as she knew that they'd be definitely tired after defeating the child, especially after she showed them some new ideas they could utilize in their fights against the Mario brothers. Looking at Larry, she could see that he was trembling slightly. So she placed a palm on his shoulder, causing him to look up at her with a worried expression, only to feel much better as he found her smiling at him. "Don't worry, Larry, even if you lose this fight. You can still learn from this. Every loss you have from this point on, learn from it and better yourself to make it that much harder," Izumi said, encouraging him. "Thank you for the encouragement, Izumi," Larry said, smiling at her. "If you put your mind to it, nothing can beat you, Larry," Izumi said, rubbing his head. As the two split up, she walked into the castle that was under her control as Larry went to the smaller castle that Bowser made earlier. She looked around the place and found that it was a perfect place to test out her new power set as well as her strength. In such a building, she knew she got stronger since she could barely lift Bowser up, and he weighed more than 1 ton. Psyching herself up, she began to run around the place to burn off some excess energy before the fight against the brothers would arrive at the castle. She knew that she would have to wait for a while before they would show themselves, so she made herself comfortable. Pulling up her magic wand that was given to her by 𝗵𝗃, she used it to see a projection of Bowser's children kidnapping Princess Peach and flying away. And she watched as Mario and his brother began their journey through the Mushroom Kingdom that had been taken over by Bowser earlier and fight through the hordes of them. Smiling to herself as she knew that her meeting with the two brothers would be coming up soon, she used her magic to call in Bowser. When he answered, he looked like a worried parent as he bit his nails after hearing her magical signature calling out to him. "Is everything going according to plan?" "How is Larry?" Bowser asked worried. "Everything is going according to plan, Bowser-san. Larry has, from what I know, entered the smaller castle to hold them off. When he comes here and fights the brothers, I will buy him enough time to escape if he loses. Once that happens, I will damage the brothers enough that I can escape as well," Izumi said as Bowser nodded. "Make sure that if they nearly defeat you that it's you leaving on your own," Bowser said, as he gave her a worried expression. "I'll be fine, Bowser-san. Just make sure to prepare yourself for when the two arrive soon," Izumi said, as Bowser nodded and ended their magical call. A few days would pass as Izumi sat in her small castle, and she sat on the throne. Looking over the 𝗏𝗏as that were a part of Bowser's full army, she made sure that they were accommodated for as well as fed and bathed since they were going to go through some pain in order to beat the Mario brothers. Once she made sure that everything was accounted for, she sat on the throne as Larry came in with a black eye and a bruised rib. He was sniffling and in clear amounts of pain. "Come here, Larry. I'll heal you," Izumi said, rushing to the boy. "They hurt me with their stone powers," Larry said, crying. "Don't worry, everything will be fine. But because I am here," Izumi said, smiling at the small turtle boy. "Thank you for healing me. I hope that I can fight them at full power again," Larry said, looking worried. "Even if you don't win, Larry, I will hold them off for you to escape," Izumi said, patting his head. He became fully confident once more as he nodded at her and rushed off to his boss stage. It was something that he'd learnt was a power that he and his siblings could make if they stayed as Bowser's children long enough, and he couldn't wait to manipulate the castle once more to suit his desires. Izumi waited on her throne as she watched over the boss room with magic, and as she saw Mario and Luigi enter the room, she watched as they became incredibly cocky. They did maneuvers around Larry as though he were just a novice at using magic, when he was really adept at using it. For an entire hour, Larry gave the two brothers a run for their money before they finally managed to put the boy on the ground and damage him enough to almost knock him out. And as he lay on the ground in pain, he held his head as he sniffled on the ground itself before Mario used his foot to lift Larry's head and glare into his eyes. "Now you're going to tell us what happened to the princess, or else," Mario said as Larry coughed. As if I'd tell you 𝗬𝗓𝗄𝗏 anything?" Larry growled from his position. Mario then pulled out a knife from his pocket as Larry glared at him harder. Mario then began to chuckle as Luigi actually looked concerned as he stared at how cruel Mario was appearing to be in the moment. "No, don't be like that. We just asked you where the princess is. Tell me where the princess is, or you will lose your prescription on life," Mario said, glaring into his eyes and holding the knife to Larry's neck. "Why your princess is in **. Another castle. Larry said as Mario sighed. You see, that wasn't so hard now, was it? Mario asked, before preparing to stab the boy in the head. You will take your hands and feet off that boy this instant? A voice rang out in the boss room. Both Mario brothers got into a fighting position in the middle of the room as they looked around the place. They searched for where the voice came from but couldn't see anyone as the darkness soon encompassed the room, and Larry, recognizing the magic of his mother-type figure, took that as his chance to escape. As soon as Mario watched Larry escape into the darkness of the room, he growled in anger before a new form entered, glaring at both men. Wow, if that is how the Mario and Luigi take care of their enemies. I am sorely mistaken for believing that you both are allies to the Mushroom Kingdom, Izumi said as she glared at the two. I will have why you know I'm not a fan of Mario's interrogation, Luigi called out as Izumi gave him a mere glance. How Bowser fell to you two astounds me. You Mario, I can see why. You are a sociopathic murderer in the making, but you Luigi, I don't see why you would willingly call Mario your brother, Izumi said, taunting the two of them. What makes you think that you can talk to me like that? Mario called out, using a fire flower and throwing a fireball. Izumi merely raised her left arm, taking the fireball to her wrist as Mario grinned at how she had been hit. But that grin faded as soon as Izumi revealed that her arm was now on fire without it burning her at all, confusing both brothers as she smirked from underneath the hero suit Bowser made for her. You know, I never knew this, but my body's affinity for fire was really high. But ever since I trained hard with Bowser-san, he's been nothing more than a person I can rely on when I need help. And I definitely hope to repay him back for his kindness for making this suit as well as training me himself, Izumi said, disappearing from sight. Both brothers looked around the room in a hurry to try and find her, before Luigi was kicked in the gut, blasting him into the castle wall behind himself. Mario looked at Luigi as he called out his name before he was kicked in the head, knocking him back into the wall nearby as he struggled to regain his footing before he felt something grab onto his neck. Looking into green eyes, he found himself entranced by them before he growled at them before yelling at her. What makes you think that working for Bowser is a good idea? He's evil, Mario called out. He's been the only person in this world to even give a damn about me. Not only that, but he actually spent time with me learning about what I like and dislike, but most of all, he gave me the second chance that I desired, Izumi said before punching Mario in the gut. As soon as Mario moved backwards, he fused himself with the fire flower as Izumi used on of her own as they stood across from one another. Mario glared at her as her, now yellow, eyes glared back at him as he pulled two of his hands together, creating a giant fireball. Izumi held a singular hand behind her as she charged the fire in her palm as she made it heat up until it reached the hottest it could reach without being fused with a gas. And the red flames that had once been coalescing in her hand had changed to a red ball of energy that caught Mario off guard as she threw the ball of energy at him, forcing him to throw the fireball. When both collided with one another, the fireball was utterly annihilated as she rushed over to Mario and his brother before blasting the two of them out of the castle. As the two brothers got back up again, Izumi stood right next to an anchor as she smiled at the two brothers with nothing more than contempt. Gur, Mario growled. If you think that you can defeat Bowser like you are sorely mistaken. He's learned from his previous mistakes, and your fight against him and his other children will only get harder from here on out, Izumi warned before pulling on the anchor a little as it rose in the air. See you when you reach World 8, she said as Luigi stared at her leave. And Mario, who was that? Luigi asked. I don't know, Mario said, before gaining a very cruel smirk. But when I find out, she will suffer, Mario said, very grimly. Izumi sat in the seat on the ship as it flew over to World 2. Izumi knew that after taking on the Mario brothers the first time, that they'd be prepared for her to arrive again soon, but how soon she thought they'd believe that she would show up was on her mind. She knew that she utterly humiliated Mario and his brother in their first meeting, but she had a spell made that she learnt from Bowser in case she had been defeated by the Mario brothers, and they decided to end her life. Looking at the spell she'd placed on her body from the scroll she held in her hand, she let out a breath of fresh air as she glanced over at the next problem. Larry was laying on the bed next to her as he recovered from his loss against the Mario brothers. One of them had been prepared to end Larry's life had they gotten their way, but Luigi appeared to be the only one who was very leery of Mario's weird acting towards Larry. Not to mention the fact that Mario appeared to be more villainous than what he showed himself towards the Toads within the Mushroom Kingdom. All that was left from this mission given to her by Bowser was to report back to him about what happened with Larry and Mario's interaction, not to mention her battle with the brothers. The way Mario looked at him, it was really concerning. I should really ask Bowser to question the princess about his actions towards his kids, mainly because that was not okay. Izumi muttered as she used some magic to heal Larry. Thank you, Mama. Larry mumbled in his sleep. Izumi stood still, ramrod straight as soon as she heard that before looking at Larry. Watching him sleep silently, she let a small smile come over her face before she replied to him. You did well, Larry. Mama loves you dearly, she said, kissing his forehead. As soon as she left the room, she looked out the window to see Mario and his brother following the ship. Glancing at how fast they were going, she saw that they were both riding members of the Yoshi dinosaur tribe within the Mushroom Kingdom. Taking a deep breath, she stood at the edge of the flying ship as she glared down at the Mario brothers as they struggled to catch up with the ship itself, hoping to grab the ship and head to World 8 immediately. She rose her wand in the air, catching the two by surprise as she swung it about in the air as it glowed ominously, before a thwomp horde appeared along their path that caused them to stop immediately. Sorry, Mario, but you're going to have to wait for me, she said as the two brothers watched her ship fly away. Walking back to the captain's room within the ship, she set up her magic calling system to get Bowser's attention. Once he answered, he looked at her with worry before she began to tell him the events of what happened at Larry's castle, not to mention how Mario was acting towards Larry. When Bowser heard this, he was almost tempted to head out there right then and there to fight the brothers in his children's name. But Izumi informed him that she had defeated the two brothers immediately as soon as she got Larry out of the room and onto the ship so he could be healed further. So what happened to Mario, Bowser? Izumi asked worriedly. I will ask the princess. This is a new development with the Mario brothers. But whatever Mario is suffering from is clearly not something that Luigi is suffering from. He was never the type to be so confident that he could get away with killing one of my family, Bowser said, a sweat drop falling down the side of his head. Call back when you have the information from Princess Peach. She's the only one aside from Luigi who knows what could have even happened to Mario, Izumi said as Bowser gave her a nod. Once she disconnected from Bowser, she looked over at the incoming castle and thought that she should check up on Roy. The brawny young man was certainly powerful with his strength as well as magic, but he prioritized his strength more than his magical power alone. So she wanted to let him know what Mario tried with Larry and for him to be careful, so as she leaped off the ship just docked outside of the castle where Roy was stationed at first before he would retreat to his castle further back. Walking through the castle itself, she soon arrived at Roy's boss room chamber as she saw him looking proud of his room for how it was set up. Roy, I just came over from World 1 in order to check up on you, Izumi said as Roy nodded at her. How is Larry? I heard from Father about what happened, Roy questioned, oddly subdued. He's doing fine, just having trouble wanting to sleep at the moment. Mario threatened his life with a knife to his throat. I managed to save him just in time before Mario tried to kill him, Izumi said as Roy growled to himself. That bastard. He threatened my little brother with such a nefarious ultimatum. I swear if I manage to get him in my hands, I will crush his windpipe. Roy growled angrily. Roy, remember the plan that Bowser had set up. We are to make them think they're winning against us, and I will come in when they are catching their breath from fighting you guys. I will kick them out of the castle before leaving with you, but make sure that in your second fight with them that you use all your strength, Izumi said as Roy nodded his head. Go easy on them in the first fight before taking them on at full power in the real castle, Roy said as Izumi nodded whilst patting his head. Good boy, when you and your siblings arrive at Bowser's castle once the brothers get past you all, I will make you all something to eat for dessert, Izumi said with a smile on her face. I wonder what it would be, Roy wondered as Izumi left the castle with a small silent giggle. As she climbed aboard Roy's ship, she flew over towards the castle in the background as she looked with the spyglass. She found Mario and Luigi starting to begin their journey through World 2-1 as they traversed through the sandy deserts that were filled with Bowser's army throughout it. Entering the castle from the front entrance, Izumi moved towards the very throne room that she could rest at, knowing that it'd take a few more days before the Mario brothers and Roy would soon arrive. As she paced around the castle, she looked for something to do to pass the time. 0W0? As Izumi sat on the throne, a few days had passed since she left Roy at his small castle. He hadn't called her back for a while, and she was worried that the Mario brothers didn't allow him to escape. That was until Roy pushed through the doors of the castle looking worse for wear. Izumi rushed over to him as she looked over the injuries that he had taken from his fight with the brothers, and she felt rage build up inside her as she saw how Roy looked. His body was littered with cuts and bruises, not to mention that around his left eye was a long cut going down. "Roy, what happened?" Izumi asked, pulling the boy closer to her. I tried. They were too strong," Roy said as he struggled to stay awake. "Don't worry, Roy, I will take things from here. Just head back home, take your ship after I heal you a bit," Izumi said as the 𝗵𝗃𝗃 nodded. As she used her magic to heal Roy from the damage dealt to him by the Mario brothers. Her shoulders trembled with rage as she healed the boy up as much as she could before sending him away from the castle before hearing a commotion outside of the castle and moved to see what was happening. Looking through one of the windows, she found that the Mario brothers were on their way over to the castle. She stayed within before noticing Roy's ship leaving the area, and the two brothers rushed to the castle. Looking at her wand, she decided to use some magic on herself to increase her power and strength, just to show them who they were messing with when touching the children of Bowser in such a way. "Where is that little bastard? I almost had him." Mario's voice rang out from the castle, as Izumi sat in the throne of the castle itself. "Mario, maybe you're going a little too far?" Luigi asked as Mario smacked him upside the head. "Luigi, I have had it up to here with Bowser and his kidnapping incidents. I will not allow this to continue further any longer." Mario spoke as Izumi entered the conversation. "You won't have to worry about that, Mario." Izumi's voice echoed across the castle, garnering the two brothers' attention. "Where are you? I know you are here," Mario yelled out, as Izumi touched down on the ground in front of them. Standing up to her full height, she found herself just slightly shorter than Mario himself as he took her form in. His eyes looked to Luigi, who was staring at her with wariness considering how they lost to her at the last large castle, and Mario was still clearly pissed about it. Smiling behind her face mask, she paced back and forth in the throne room as she thought about what she should say to them. Luigi was clearly someone who didn't like what Mario was doing, but at the same time he was still a hero for the Mushroom Kingdom and an enemy to Bowser. "The way you treat Bowser's clan. It's as though you are racist towards them. This land was originally his before the princess came here," Izumi said, holding her hands behind her back. "Nice try with the lie. The princess has been here far longer than Bowser has," Mario quipped as Izumi shook her head. "How old is the princess, Mario?" Izumi asked, allowing him to think about it. "What does it matter? After we're done with you, you will wish you never met us," Mario said, rushing Izumi. He pulled an arm back and threw a right hook at her, which she ducked under, and delivered a left uppercut to his liver, causing him to cough out some spittle. She then jumped and spin-kicked him in the head, blasting him back towards Luigi, who had caught the brother and placed him on the ground again as he pulled out a mallet and rushed her. Swinging the mallet at her, she swung a right hook towards the weapon itself, breaking it before taking the handle and snapping it in two before tossing it over the bridge. Just as the two looked behind her, seeing an axe over the bridge they stood on, Luigi rushed towards it. Izumi sat still in her position as she watched him grab the weapon and slice the chains holding the bridge. But as he watched the chains clearly get cut, he looked confused as Izumi walked over to him and tapping his shoulder as he looked at her confused before she grabbed his throat and threw him at his brother. Mario got back into his combat position before finding his brother being launched at him as he dodged out of the way. Looking back at Izumi with a glare, he pulled out the snow flower he collected on his journey through the sandy desert and threw a massive snowball at her. As she merely looked at it unimpressed, she watched as it began to create a cube of ice around her. She only snapped her fingers as the power immediately dispelled as Mario stared at her in shock before throwing multiple snowballs at her in a bid to catch her off guard. She then rushed through his barrage of snowballs before leaping in the air and using her magic to turn the snowballs into a fire flower that she bonded with and activated its power within her. Landing on the ground, she cracked her neck before taking a deep breath as she smirked at Mario, who stared at her in shock before her throat glowed orange and fire blasted out of her mouth. As Mario was blasted into the wall, he was singed but not out of the fight just yet. Izumi coughed slightly because of how sore the attack always made her throat, before pulling out some water to get her throat back to its normal status. Luigi then came out of the smoke with a stone form as he launched a punch at her that blasted her back through the wall of the castle. The brother looked at his fist as though it weren't something he originally used, not to mention. He felt soft flesh under the punch he released and became worried as he rushed towards the hole in the wall. When he reached the wall, he noticed a large beam coming for him as he blocked his vision with his arms as the beam of weird green energy blasted by him. He felt the stone power slowly ebbing away from him before he felt its power subside from his body, allowing the beam to burn him. Letting out a scream of pain and agony, he was blasted back into the same wall that Mario had been blasted into but was slowly coming to his bearings. Izumi climbed out of the hole in the wall made by Luigi, punching her with a smile on her face as she placed a device on the ground before walking towards the hole. "Where do you think you're going?" Mario called out, as Izumi pressed a button on her wrist gauntlet. "Just leaving you two here with a little present. Just know this, your princess is in another castle," Izumi said, leaping from the castle's balcony. Mario and Luigi got their bearings fully before looking at the device on the ground before noticing something odd about it. It had a ticking timer as it showed a few more seconds left on it, before they noticed the building beginning to heat up before rushing out the same way that Izumi had left the building. Once they got to the ground, they watched as the building behind them was sucked up into a black hole before the black hole was slowly destroyed by magic in the air. Looking up, they found Izumi sitting on a broomstick with a very happy expression on her face as she floated near them. "Color me surprised that you both escaped that. I shouldn't even be surprised that you were able to get out of the building that fast. But know this, Bowser is already pissed at what you did to Larry. Imagine how much fury he'll have when he finds out that you nearly killed another one of his children," Izumi said with a taunting tone. "We don't get to say that when he kidnapped the princess again," Mario called out as Izumi shook her head. "Bowser never lays a hand on her, much less damages her when he kidnaps her. Just leaves her in a room before you guys show up. It's honestly a surprise that he hasn't killed her by now," Izumi said as Luigi looked at her confused. "We've always seen bruises on her," Luigi called out. "Those are from the cuffs on her. His forces don't treat her kindly since you guys treat them as though they're worthless towards the Toads. Do some research on the kingdom you are protecting, then you might actually see who the good guy is here. And just a little kicker, Bowser only fell in love with the princess because she was his polar opposite in the way he lived," Izumi said, flying away over to World 3. "Darn it. We will defeat you," Mario called out as Izumi just flew farther away. "Come on, Mario, we should continue on," Luigi said as Mario nodded. With Izumi, she was holding her cheeks slightly before taking the mask off her eyes. Looking at her cheek, she found a small bruise forming there as she thought back to her fight with Luigi after knocking Mario into the nearby wall. He hits really hard for a skittish young man, especially with that stone power-up he had hidden in his pants, Izumi said as she flew towards the nearest castle, Lemmy's castle. She touched down before hopping off her broomstick as she walked into the smaller castle. Walking through its halls, she found a spot where she could give her report to Bowser once more as his face lit up at seeing her again, but was not amused as her face was sporting a bruise on her cheek. "I see that your most recent defense against the brothers had given you a bruise," Bowser said, not happy at all. "I just didn't notice Luigi until it was too late. It won't happen again, Bowser. The plan, however, is going as planned, with the minor exception of Mario being far more murderous towards your children," Izumi said with a sigh. "I just feel like we should allow them to get to my castle before we risk more of my children's lives. Much less yours. I know how you fare against the Mario brothers at this point. So long as you surprise them, you can defeat them handedly." Come back home so that we can plan around them coming here faster. I'd rather keep you close by. 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗪 said, as Izumi nodded. What about the 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗲? Izumi asked, as 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗪 rubbed his chin. I'll call them back, let some of my more powerful forces fight them. Junior is already here with 𝗂𝗵𝗃. 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗪 said, as Izumi nodded before seeing 𝗵𝗵𝗃 walk up to her. What's up, mama? He said, holding his hands high in the air, shaking them about. Izumi blushed crimson as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 looked at her with a raised eyebrow. She looked at him with worry in her expression as she watched 𝗬𝗲𝗪's confused expression change to something she hadn't seen since she first arrived here. Was that lust or arousal? She'd have to ask him that later on, when she got there with 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗲. 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗲, your dad has called for us to head back to his castle, Izumi said as 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗲 groaned. Ah, but I wanted to fight Mario and his brother. He whined as Izumi shook her head. Mario is out for blood, and he's actively trying to kill those in his way. Izumi said as 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗲 trembled slightly. Really? I thought he was supposed to be a hero. 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗲 asked, although not too loudly. We just need to leave, we don't want you getting killed in your fight against Mario and Luigi. Izumi said as 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗲𝗓 nodded. We can pick up my siblings on our way back home. 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗲𝗓 said as Izumi nodded. We'll see you when we get back, 𝗬𝗲𝗪. Izumi said with a bow. Be sure to dodge any interaction with the Mario brothers until then, 𝗬𝗲𝗪 said before ending the connection between their magic. As Izumi rowed the ship over towards World 3, she had decided to pick up the other 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗲s along her way back to 𝗬𝗲𝗪's castle. The adventure to pick those kids up was actually fun since she got to see more of the 𝗧𝗵𝗃 kingdom and interact with those who lived within it. Conversing with some of those who were a part of 𝗬𝗲𝗪's army had been fun for her, and when she wasn't interacting with those of 𝗬𝗲𝗪's forces, she was focusing on learning new magic to use. And instead of using brainwashing magic, she used transmutation magic that she read about in 𝗬𝗲𝗪's own little library inside his castle that she brought with her on this journey. Walking through the ship, he watched as they passed over World 4 as she traveled across the entirety of the 𝗧𝗵𝗃 kingdom. She smiled at the subjects belonging to 𝗬𝗲𝗪 as she collected the 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗲s and moved towards World 8. As time passed, she kept a close eye on the Mario brothers. They were getting through World 3 as they were just about finished with gathering the 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃 from World 4. As the ship took off, the Mario brothers had just entered World 4 and were rushing through the world without even stopping for a second, something that greatly concerned her. They're moving through the worlds far faster than I predicted. They'd be able to reach 𝗬𝗲𝗪's castle within the next couple of hours if we don't hurry. Izumi muttered to herself as she looked at a nearby 𝗧𝗵𝗃 resident. They looked back up at her with confusion as she rose her wand around in the air as she swung it towards them. With a rainbow glow, the 𝗧𝗵𝗃 had increased in size until he was around the same size as 𝗬𝗲𝗪, although without any spikes growing out of his turtle shell. She then telepathically told him to hold off the Mario brothers as long as he could, prioritize keeping himself alive and keeping the brothers busy. With a salute, he fought the brothers with gusto as he smacked them around with Mario pulling out a special power-up that he could use against them. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As the floating ship continued to fly towards World 5, Izumi could only watch as the 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗲 that she had transformed into a giant version of themselves rushed away. She smiled as she watched him shrink down into his normal height and hide inside of a green pipe, retreating into safety before letting out a breath of fresh air in relief. Standing back on the deck, she informed those who were under her command that they were to retreat back to 𝗬𝗲𝗪's castle before they fight the Mario brothers once more. They were too dangerous to fight against them as of right now, and she wanted to get enough rest in order to fight them again. She sat down on the seat that marked her as the captain of the ship as she looked down upon her subordinates that 𝗬𝗲𝗪 gave her. Looking at her wand, she pulled up an image of 𝗬𝗲𝗪 as he looked at her with worry on his expression as he waited for her to speak to him and give him an update. 𝗬𝗲𝗪-san, we've managed to reach World 5. The Mario brothers were able to keep up with the ship, but I had to use a 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗲 to buy us enough time to get ahead of them. By the time they reach World 5 they will be far behind us, Izumi said, as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 happily sighed. Thank you for bringing the 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗲s with you. I have no idea what would happen if you didn't bring them with you on your way back home, 𝗬𝗲𝗪 said, as he placed a clawed hand over his snout and face. I'm just reciprocating the love and care you gave me. You don't need to thank me, sir, Izumi said as she looked away with a blush. Doesn't matter, when should I expect your arrival? He asked, getting down to business. We shouldn't be home until around later in the afternoon. But I promise that the kids will be back for dinner. Izumi said as 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗪𝗧 happily nodded. Good, then it's probably best that I send out the word of retreat to the other 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗍. 𝗬𝗲𝗧 said, as he ended their communications. With 𝗬𝗲𝗧 calling back the rest of his forces, Izumi decided to just pick up Iggy and bring him home with her. With 𝗬𝗲𝗧 calling back his troops, she knew that his children would listen to him immediately and retreat from there. Castles across worlds 6 and 7. 𝗬𝗲𝗧 Jr. though would need some more convincing, as he would believe that since he's 𝗬𝗲𝗧's biological child that he'd be strong enough to fight the Mario brothers alone. So as soon as she moved over to World 7, she leaped off the ship taking Iggy and his brothers back to 𝗬𝗲𝗧's castle as she traversed the ship to find Junior. Walking through the ship she found the area where Junior loved to stay within, only to find him painting on the wall of his ship. Smiling at him she walked over to him as she sat next to him as she watched him focus on the art entirely without even looking in her direction. Sighting in silence, the two just enjoyed the art the boy was making as Izumi watched off in the distance for Mario and his brother to arrive in World 7 before she glanced back at Junior. His painting skills were far better after she taught him everything she knew ever since he asked her to train him how to draw and paint much better than he could originally. She placed a palm on his back and rubbed it as he turned his head to look at her only to find Izumi smiling at him sadly. Standing up, the little 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗍 smiled up at her before hugging her tightly as they watched his creation with the eyes of an inspector looking at a piece of artwork created by an artist. You could do a little less of the black paint, but I'm not going to judge you, Izumi said, as Junior happily nodded. I use my black paint to increase the power of those around me. I use it for father sometimes when Mario beats him physically to add a bit more power to his skills. Junior said as he stared at his ship. Did you get the sound of retreat from 𝗬𝗲𝗧, Junior? Izumi asked as Junior nodded. I want to give Dad and my siblings enough time to rest before the brothers get there. I'm sure my dad would appreciate the rest he'd get from not fighting them for at least a few more hours. Junior said, looking decided. Well then, I guess it's up to me to make sure you return home tonight then, Izumi said, patting his head. You'll help me fight the brothers? He asked, incredulously. Yup, I can't exactly leave you to the devices of Mario now, can I? Izumi asked with a smirk. Are you planning to help me in my fight? I'd like to fight them alone first, he said, as Izumi nodded. Don't worry, I will only assist you when I know that the brothers have defeated you, Izumi said, as Junior happily hugged her. Thank you, I just want to show father that I can be as dangerous as he is. Those Mario brothers won't know what hit them, Junior said, as they entered his ship. 0W0? As soon as the two were on the ship, they found that Mario and Luigi were entering it as well from riding the anchor. Looking at the little Koopa boy, she smiled at how he was setting up his little clown copter in preparation for his battle against the Italian brothers who were coming to save the princess. As she got into a position to where she can save Junior from a demise that would most assuredly piss off 𝗬𝗲𝗧 entirely, she watched as the Mario brothers went through Junior's forces until they reached his boss room. She sat on a throne covered in darkness, something that Junior came up with so that she can enter the fight and interrupt it if she deems it too dangerous for him. And as the Mario brothers fought Junior, she watched as the Koopa boy had implemented some strategies that she'd made against the brothers. Catching the two so off guard that he'd nearly defeated them from the moment they stepped into the room, he didn't even give them time to question him before he attacked. Izumi had made the strategy that the reason the Mario brothers won against him and his siblings were because he and they all always talked first before attacking. They needed to attack their enemies to catch them off guard as they were expecting them to go on a monologue before attacking, giving the brothers enough time to mentally prepare. The small Koopa had launched multiple bullet bills at the brothers who were dodging and weaving through as many as possible. Within a few minutes, however, Junior was shown to have completely run out of devices to use against Mario and Luigi, and the two brothers had knocked the Koopa boy to the ground as he bounced across the wooden beams. As he stopped just under Izumi's throne, she looked down at him as she rose her wand in the air, dropping some rainbow dust onto his form just to increase his power and size, knowing that this would destroy his ship and send the brothers down falling from the sky. Now that you are done fighting, How about you tell us where the princess is? Mario questioned, glaring at Junior. I'd never tell. Not that you'd be able to see her after this, Junior called out, as his body increased in size. Just from his size increasing, Junior's ship began to rumble and break under his newfound weight as he grabbed Izumi with his giant clawed hand and placed her on his shoulders to look over the fight. And as the Mario brothers fell from the sky, they used new power-up items to allow them to land safely on the ground before they found Junior glaring down at them with his new height. They rushed at him using a mixture of power-up items before Junior sent attacks their way, causing destruction and mayhem along the world they were on. As Junior threw a clawed slice towards the brothers, Luigi had gone to smack the Koopa boy in the face before Izumi leaped in and kicked Luigi down to the ground as he stared at her in shock. Izumi glared at him before he gained a determined expression and rushed up Junior's arm towards her as he pulled out a new mallet to use against her. Izumi, using her newfound strength, had blocked the hit now that she knew it was coming, as she then swiped Luigi's legs out from under him as she then kicked him off of Junior's body, following after him towards the ground. As the two landed on the ground near World 8, she stood with a very relaxed expression on her face. Luigi, though, was now able to see what her face really appeared to be now. She was the girl that he and his brother tried to talk to in that jail cell back at the Mushroom Kingdom. He gained a concerned expression as he prepared a new power-up, as he was then kicked in the face by a flying kick from the girl as she twirled in the air, landing on one of her feet. She smiled at him as she held onto the power-up item he was going to use against her, smirking as she found it to be a fire flower. Did you really think that a fire flower would help you in this fight? I've bonded with the flower itself, and I'm sure that you know what happens when I'm capable of using its power, Izumi quipped as she absorbed it into her body. Her suit that was tailor-made to protect her from attacks as well as suit her style of fighting changed. A bright orange tank top was shown over her as light, tan-colored pants covered her legs as her red boots stayed the same color before the tips of her hair changed to a light reddish color. But what really caused Luigi to stare at her in awe was how her eye color went from emerald to a lime yellow, as it showed that she wasn't kidding about bonding with the fire flower. Behind her, Junior was fighting Mario, who was using the stone fruit in order to make sure he wasn't flattened by Junior's attacks. He was getting sick and tired of being batted around like a rag doll and pulled out a weapon of his own. Swinging a knife at the Koopa, who barely even flinched at the sight of the unsightly weapon on the brother. He swung his claws at Mario as their weapons clashed, creating a clanging sound before they swung faster at one another, creating black flashes of bright light. As the two continued their fight, Izumi just rushed at Luigi as the man had used the stone fruit in order to increase his strength as he rushed to her as well. The two thrusted their attacks at one another, Luigi thrusting his fist towards her face and Izumi thrusting a palm strike into Luigi's gut, which connected at the same time as his fist hitting her cheek. As Luigi was pushed back by a powerful force, he watched as Izumi stood back up, knocking some dust off her form. She had been sent ragdolling across the dirt away from Luigi as the man was looking at her with a determined frown as he then decided to try and reason with her, since she didn't trust Mario. Why did you side with Bowser? He's evil, Luigi called out. Are you trying to get me to tell you my reasons for joining Bowser's army? Izumi asked, incredulous expression on her face. I'm trying to see why you wouldn't see us as the real people who are kind, Luigi called out as Izumi shook her head. Your people torture those who were here long before the princess ever was. Bowser's kingdom was here long before the princess's was. But like hell I'd tell you my reasons for joining him, Izumi yelled, rushing at him. Luigi pulled up an arm as Izumi swung her leg around in a spinning arc as it slammed down on his singular arm. The force of her attack created a deep crater as Luigi was actually feeling some damage in his arm from holding her there. The two struggled in pushing the other away or into the ground. Izumi then pulled an arm back and created a fireball that smashed right into Luigi's body, causing him to be sent flying into a nearby wall, using up the power in his stone fruit. When his power left his body, Izumi walked over to him as she picked him up by his collar and then held him close to her as he looked into her yellow eyes. Do it. I'm not that important, Luigi called as Izumi shook her head. You're the only person who doesn't wish to kill Bowser's children. You're worthy of staying alive in this world. You just need to see who the real enemy of the Mushroom Kingdom really is, Izumi said, dropping the man to the ground and walking away. As she walked away, Luigi could only stare on in complete awe as she just let him live. No member of Bowser's army would leave them to live if they were strong enough to beat him or Mario. There had to be a reason she let him live. And he watched as Izumi moved near Mario and Junior's battle as the two were knocked away from one another, Mario landing on the ground and Junior losing his massive height advantage. He fell to a knee as he panted in heavy exhaustion before Izumi stood next to him, placing a palm on his shoulder. He looked up at her as Mario noticed her presence. "So you show yourself. Finally. I can put you down," Mario called out, as Izumi waved her wand around. She used a spell in her native tongue, stopping Mario from moving and watching her in wariness. 𝗔𝗫𝗄𝗧𝗏, teleportation, Izumi muttered, just loud enough for Junior to hear her and for Mario to become concerned. With that spell used, Bowser Jr. was teleported back to Bowser's castle, looking completely confused at his father, who picked him up in worry. But as soon as he realized that Izumi wasn't with him, he sent his army out to find her in hopes of bringing her back to the castle safely. He didn't want to lose the one human woman who gave him what he wished. Family. Back with Izumi, however, she stood across from Mario as the wind blew in the high altitude of the mountainous area. Her hair fluttered with the wind as Mario kept his knife in his hand before he tossed it, replacing it with a meat cleaver as he smiled manically at her. He was planning on killing her since she was becoming a pain in the ass to deal with, so as he stepped towards her, she watched as his blue eyes changed colors to a deep crimson color as he walked towards her. She entered a combat stance before sensing Luigi standing up and moving behind her. For some reason she felt as though the two coming at her from two different directions was unfair for a fight, but that didn't matter. Her only job now was to buy Bowser enough time to prepare his world for the invasion of the two brothers. "What makes you think that you can end me? I was trained by Bowser himself, and I will not let him down," Izumi said, as she waved her wand around. Luigi immediately pounced towards her as she swung her wand in his direction, causing him to be pulled to the ground as a painting paper had appeared and he was trapped inside of it. Looking at Mario, she watched as he stared at her without any kind of emotion within his eyes as he watched his brother get trapped in a painting but kept walking towards her. She then pointing the wand at herself as she stood with a serious expression at Mario, who stopped a few meters away from her as he spun his cleaver around in a swift circle. Then as soon as rainbow dust covered her body, he rushed at her, swinging his cleaver in her direction before he felt something clang against his weapon. Kicked backwards, he bounced across the dirt before he stood back up, swiping some dust and debris from his clothing. Standing in the cloud was now Izumi as she stood a few inches taller, but her body was now looking more like a human version of Bowser if he kept the shell on his back. The spiked turtle shell on her back was large but at the same time didn't hold her back because of its weight, as she had a black color around her entire body and her hair was a deep crimson color. The pupils of her eyes were there as she stood in her own version of the fury form Bowser could utilize against the Mario brothers. She stared at him as she rose a new weapon against Mario as he stared at it. The weapon itself was more akin to a stick than what he originally thought, but its coloring was what really threw him for a loop, as the weapon itself was metallic in color before it looked like a pole or something. She twirled it around as she thrusted it in a wide arc towards the plumber as he used his cleaver to swipe towards it. As a loud clang was heard, the two disappeared from their positions on the ground as they reappeared in the sky. Swinging their weapons at the same time, Izumi used everything she learned from Bowser to her advantage as the two clashed in the sky all over the place. Eventually she found a spot where she could hit Mario without him realizing it. Slamming her weapon in a downwards arc, he went to block it as she feinted it and pulled her weapon away, allowing him to overextend his own attack as she swung the staff into his liver. Coughing up a lot of spittle, she then kicked him in the head, knocking him across the ground as she landed on the ground as Mario sat upright again, glaring at her with an unamused expression. He then spat out a tooth as he rushed at her again, this time with far more rage and impatience than before as he tried to overpower her with his unnatural strength. Izumi dodged and weaved through his attacks before she threw her staff at him that he used his cleaver to block and knock away. all before he felt 2 pairs of boots hitting his stomach, causing him to cough up even more spittle and a few flecks of blood as be smashed through a nearby forest. Izumi, however, walked back to Luigi and the painting she'd left him in, as he could only watch in horror as she grabbed his painting and grabbed him by the neck and pulled him out, all before giving him a very apologetic expression as he watched his brother leap at her from behind. "Sorry," she said as he stared at her in confusion. "Why are you apologizing to Amy?" Luigi asked, before he found himself thrusted in front of her body. Time seemed to slow down as Luigi watched Mario's manic expression slowly devolve into complete and utter confusion as the meat cleaver came dreadfully close to Luigi's face. He closed his eyes, preparing for the end to come, before he found himself being pulled out of the way as Mario was punted away from them. Looking at Izumi, he found that the girl just was not looking all that good. Her face was pale, and she looked very regretful towards him, as though what she did was something that greatly disgusted her. He then spoke to her, all before Time resumed. "Why you saved me? Why?" he asked, confused. "It's not what a real hero would do. A real hero would protect everyone. And you guys are helping the wrong guys. The toads are the ones who are the invasive species on this planet," Izumi said, before dropping Luigi. As Luigi was dropped to the ground, he watched as Izumi walked away. Seemingly finished with her fight with the 2 brothers, Luigi then noticed Mario priming his meat cleaver to be thrown as he looked between the 2. Once again, time slowed down to a crawl as Luigi looked between the 2. His brother was becoming more and more crazy the longer he fought Bowser, as evidenced by his brother's once blue eyes now been crimson. So he decided to make a decision for himself, for the first time in his life. And as time continued at a crawl, he rushed to push Izumi down to the ground as she immediately turned around, sensing him. She looked prepared to fight before he pushed her out of the way as she watched what he was protecting her from. The meat cleaver was now back in normal time movement speed as it slammed into the back of his head, causing her to stare at Luigi with shock as well as worry as she watched the man cough. Then his hat fell down with a large cut in it before she watched as his head had blood flow down from his head and down his clothing on his back as he fell to his knees and collapsed to the ground. Looking up at Mario, she found no emotion on his face as he slowly walked over to her. Looking at Luigi, she grabbed the weapon from his head and softly removed it as she used gloves to prevent her fingerprints being seen on it. It wasn't long before Mario sat in front of his brother as Izumi took this moment to leave the area. Looking into Mario's eyes, they were now a soft blue color as he pulled his brother into his arms as he began to cry, apologizing to his brother and pleading with him to stay alive. Not only that, but he kept asking the man why he took the cleaver for Izumi. As Izumi walked away from the area, it was only a matter of time before Mario would be coming for Bowser. And Izumi was leaving as fast as she could. She didn't want to face a Mario who had lost a brother and hellbent on getting vengeance for his brother's death, even though he was the killer. Izumi got into a forest before hearing the sound of pattering footsteps, and as soon as she turned around, she found Mario quite literally in her face with the emotion of only fury writ on his face as he thrusted a fist into her face with some supernatural strength behind his attack. The attack alone probably shouldn't have hurt her as much as it did as it blasted her through the forest she was running through, but when she stopped whilst creating a divot in the forest floor, she found Mario high above her, eyes as crimson as though they were his true eye color as he held his meat cleaver in hand. "You won't get away from Amy again. I will end your life here and now," Mario said, landing on her chest, causing her to cough out spittle in pain. "Trigger warning, brutal murder." He then raised his cleaver and slammed it down onto her superpowered form's chest, causing the power to dissipate from her body. All before he slammed it into her chest again, causing her to scream out in pain. Blood flowed from the new wound on her body as she kicked him off of her. As he landed on his back, Izumi slowly got back up into a standing form as she looked at him as she glanced down at her own wound. It was bleeding profusely as she thought about the spell she used on her body back a few hours ago for an event such as this. "This is going to go badly," Izumi muttered to herself as Mario leaped at her again. Looking up at Mario, she watched as Mario gained a sick manic smile on his face as he threw his weapon at her. It slammed right into her gut, slicing it open as she screamed out in pain and agony, falling to the ground as blood continued to fall out of her body. As she stared into the sky, she watched as her vision was slowly blackening out as Mario stood above her now with nothing more than incandescent rage in his eyes before he spoke down to her. "I will find Bowser. I will kill each and every one of his family in front of his eyes. Then I will give him the same treatment," Mario said before raising his fist in the air. All before noticing the life in the girl's eyes disappear as her head fell to the side. He moved away from her body as he then growled to himself. He wanted to make her suffer for causing him to kill his little brother, but now that she's dead he has to go after Bowser and his forces. He will not be forced to kill another of his own people anymore. He is done with, wait, what was that smell? Trigger warning end. Winky face. Looking behind himself, he found Izumi's body slowly mutating and twitching violently. Her body, no longer the dark black color with her hair being crimson, was back to its original colors before her body began to massively increase in height. Green scales began to replace the skin that was once on her pale body as her form then transformed into that of a giant creature that was never before seen in both the Koopa Kingdom and the Mushroom Kingdom. The beast gained gigantic horns that were as thick as 10 humans combined into one person as they thickly twisted around, forming pointed ends. Wings sprouted out from her back as her body elongated and created a tail from just above her rear. All before her face and snout became longer and more bestial as sharp teeth were shown to grow from her original human teeth. Not to mention how her fangs became more pronounced. Her eyes remained closed as she grew to her new full height as she stood at a whopping 30 meters. Her length in this form was now 22 meters long, with her tail appearing to be more akin to that of a legend she had told Bowser that he reminded her of, although the creature she spoke was not a fire-breathing spiked-shelled turtle. Mario took in the new appearance of Izumi as her eyes then opened up, the nictating membrane of her eyes revealing her now slitted and very furious eyes as it glared down at the plumber. She took a deep breath as she lifted her head to the sky as her underbelly shone that she had black scales that went from under her mouth all the way down to the underside of her tail. Her slitted eyes revealed her emerald-colored pupils as she let out a roar out into the heavens. A new foe was created, a more draconic origin, that is. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗄𝗏. Mamma mia? What is that? Mario called out. The gigantic dragon looked down towards Mario as the plumber had just stared at her in both awe and confusion. He didn't think that she had a power that could transform her into a literal legendary creature that had long since been forgotten to time itself. How in the literal hell did she achieve a magical status that allowed her to transform herself into a fucking dragon? These thoughts were what were on Mario's mind as he moved to immediately get out of the way of what he thought was her coming in to attack him, as her legs had pushed down on the ground. And as though she were reading his mind, she just leaped up into the air and flew away with that 32-meter-long wingspan that propelled her towards World 8, the place where Bowser lived. As Mario watched the dragon fly off, he couldn't help but wonder what Luigi would think of him at this moment. And without thinking much on that front for much longer, he decided to just head over to Bowser's castle, free Peach, and demand him to revive his younger brother. Because he needs to right that wrong right away, and make sure that his brother knows that he didn't aim for him, and aimed for the bitch who he had defended. He knew his brother would probably not like him calling the woman a bitch, but did he care? That woman had sided with Bowser, the one creature who had attacked the Mushroom Kingdom without fail hundreds if not thousands of times. Who cares if the Mushroom Kingdom invaded Bowser's homeland and took it over? Who cares what that Koopa thinks about what land is his? The Mushroom Kingdom laid claim to the land, and they will not hand it over. With Izumi, the dragon girl had been flying across the sky as she looked over her height and length once more. She knew that she had increased in size dramatically, but she didn't think that her growth into a literal dragon was so large that it would have been practically impossible to fly as smoothly as she currently was. The fact that she was a 30-meter-tall dragon and had a wingspan of 32 meters, her flight shouldn't have been as easy as it was right now, and feeling her tail around she found that her initial calculations of her length was off by at least double of her actual height. She may be 15, but that didn't mean that she knew how to calculate without any kind of equipment. So as she closed in on World 8, She slowed her descent towards the castle as she heard the sounds of battle from below as Mario had switched up from his meat cleaver over to his fists and feet in order to fight the Koopa clan. She landed just outside of Bowser's castle when the gates opened up as Bowser came running out. Before seeing her standing out there in a dragon form, he looked confused at her for a second before using his magic to decrease her height and weight. Bringing the dragon inside, he moved his forces and spread them out so that it would take Mario some more time to get to him. Staring at the now 10-meter tall and 20-meter long dragon sitting in his throne room, he couldn't help but wonder what had happened to Izumi in order to transform her into this creature. Sure, he was happy to know that she was alive, but if she was in this form, then that meant something happened that forced her hand to transform her body into a creature of legend. "Izumi, what in the hell happened out there?" Bowser called out up to her. The dragon looked down to him as he stared at her in worry. Her body then began to glow a green and black color before her body was replaced with her regular humanoid form, although she looked far more draconic. Her arms were covered in black and green scales. Her chest was much the same, except she had a sports bra covering her very large breasts. Her thighs were covered in a pair of yoga pants that were dark blue in color, whilst underneath she had scales building up the sides of her legs. Her stomach and abs were having some scales crawling up the sides of her body building up to her neck, and a part of her face having some scales on them as well. When she opened her eyes, they were slitted with a nictating membrane allowing her to keep her eyes open for long periods of time. Not to mention that her once emerald-colored eyes were now heterochromatic, with one being the emerald color Bowser found himself loving, whilst the other was now yellow. He was about to speak to her before he noticed something off about her hair and head, as a pair of black horns with small flowers budding from them had shown themselves before her voice spoke out loud. "Sorry, Bowser-san, but Mario, he managed to kill me," Izumi said, looking down. "I'm sorry, did you say he killed you?" Bowser asked, as Izumi nodded, rubbing her left arm. "Then how did you turn into a dragon?" Bowser asked, confused. "Magic. I used a spell before I first fought Mario that would activate upon my... If he or anyone were to kill my human body, then the magic would activate using the spell I used to transform my body that would make my new body incapable of being killed much the same way," Izumi said, explaining everything. "Okay, so now that you look like this, will you be able to transform your features back to your human counterpart? Or are you stuck in this form now?" Bowser had asked, curious but concerned. "My old body was killed, I can't return to it. I'm stuck as this now, although I think I like this form better. It's better than being," Izumi said, before pausing and looking at Bowser. "Are you telling me that you'd rather stay like this than be a human for the rest of your life?" Bowser asked, his eyes covered in shadows. "No, I mean, if I had to choose between being human and using magic in order to grow stronger, even if that means transforming into a dragon, I'd do it again to protect the innocent and your kids," Izumi said as Bowser sighed. "How did Mario kill your original body, Izumi?" Bowser asked, sitting in his throne. Izumi remained quiet as she looked down, guilt showing itself on her expression. Bowser looked at her with an expression that demanded her to tell him as she spoke again, although her tone was laced with a trembling voice. He jumped into the air and slammed a meat cleaver into my chest," Izumi said, as Bowser inhaled silently. "Mario doesn't have a meat cleaver in his arsenal. He'd never go that far, so why and how did he gain that kind of weapon? That's a tool for the kitchen anyway," Bowser thought to himself. As Bowser thought about the way Izumi died and subsequently revived herself. In a very horrible way, mind you, not comparable to his own revival spell in and of itself, but similar in how it's activated. Outside of the castle walls, Mario stood with sweat falling down the sides of his head. He had been given a lot of time to think about everything that had happened in the last few hours of his day and was incredibly sorry for how his brother died against Izumi. But his only goal now was not to kill Bowser and his children, but to save the princess like he always does, and bring balance back to the world that he inhabited. "Let's say go," Mario muttered as he pushed open the gates of Bowser's castle. 0W0? Bowser was pacing around the room as he thought about why Mario acted the way he had with Izumi. Not only had he killed his forces along his way for vengeance, But he had very quickly tried to kill his children twice, and he wouldn't even hold back against Mario at this point. He killed Izumi and forced her transformation, but at the time he couldn't think more about it as he heard the sounds of fighting in his castle, and he turned his face to look at the door. He had glanced at Izumi with his eyes as she glared at the door as well, with nothing more than determination, as the doors were blasted open as a 𝗧𝗵𝗲 had bounced across the ground. "I have come here for the Princess, Bowser," Mario said, his eyes glowing blue through the dark haze in front of him. "So you have... But there is something different this time around. You have tried to kill my children, and that is not all right with me," Bowser growled as he stood upright. "I wasn't thinking straight, but I just want to get the princess out of here," Mario retorted as Bowser shook his head. "That's where you're wrong, Mario. You won't be leaving this castle with your puny princess alive," Bowser said, immediately attacking the plumber with his full strength. The two ran at one another with their full strength, and Izumi watched from the side. The two were somewhat evenly matched, with Bowser letting out ferocious slices in the air as Mario deftly dodged to the left and right, even dropping his head low enough to which his head floated in the air for a second before falling back on his head. Mario then went to go for a left hook as he bonded with a stone fruit in order to make sure that his hit actually damaged Bowser, only for his attack to be held back. Looking over with his eyes, he found Izumi staring at him, although she wasn't in her draconic form anymore and was sporting a new look. Focusing on his task of defeating his opponents, Mario set about the area as he grabbed some of the castle's pillars and throwing them at Bowser and Izumi, one of which had jumped high into the air, whilst the other grabbed the pillar itself before sending it back at Mario. With the plumber being double-teamed by Bowser and Izumi, the plumber was beginning to think that this might be the end for him, before he found Princess Peach inside of a metal cage above the room. He then used whatever item that Bowser threw at him in order to bounce around the room and leap across it as he reached Princess Peach before finding a comedically large button before pressing it. As Bowser stared at the button in alarm, he looked over at Izumi, who had immediately looked down as the ground rumbled. Bowser then felt his feet fall out from under himself as he fell into the lava pit down below. He could vaguely hear Izumi scream out his name and dive for him. But he had a plan. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 was disguising himself as Peach and would use his magic on him to make his defenses not fail to the lava. That's not to say that he's had lava baths before. He had been dropped into a sun, an exploding universe, a super large black hole, and just for equal measure another Big Bang in his tenure as the 𝗧𝗵𝗃 King. So as he felt the magic of 𝗧𝗵𝗃 becoming one with his body, he came flying out of the lava in his kaiju form as he roared at Mario. And the plumber had used platforms within his castle in order to traverse the entire castle itself before hearing Princess Peach's voice calling out to him as he rushed over to her. By the time Mario had reached Peach, he found another comically large button and stepped on it just as Bowser had leaped over to him as he seemingly floated in the lava before the castle appeared to be falling apart. Looking everywhere in order to find out what happened, the lava moat beneath him had begun to split apart and disappear into the ground. This caused him to immediately fall downward, and Izumi chased after him, allowing Mario and Peach to escape. And as the two escaped, Izumi managed to use her own magic to bring Bowser back to his original height and weight as she holds onto his clawed hands. She felt herself drop a bit more, before she managed to hold his weight under herself as she lifted him just enough to where she could fly him and herself out of the castle. By the time the two arrives outside of the castle itself, Bowser is shown laying on the ground in more or less shame for falling for such a very bad impression of how he was able to protect them and fight Mario. And as he felt as though his children wouldn't think of him as the ideal father, he was then hugged by his kids. They all cried in thankfulness that he survived his battle with Mario, as Izumi stood from the side as she smiled at the interaction between the father and his kids. Before that smile fell as she felt as though her presence in this moment was far too awkward, considering that she doesn't feel like she's a part of the family, ignoring the knowledge that two of the 𝗧𝗵𝗃lings believe her to be a mother figure. "What are you doing standing there? Get in this hug," Junior called out to Izumi, who just blinked at him owlishly. "What?" she asked, confused. "Come on. Join us in the family hug," Roy called out as he waved an arm at her. "Yeah, Mama. Join us," Lenny said as he bounced on one leg. I don't know, are you sure I can? I wouldn't want to intrude on the moment." Izumi said, looking away whilst rubbing her arm. Do you not want to be our new mommy? Wendy, the only female 𝗬𝗂𝗧𝗏 asked, with a sad expression. Izumi looked at each of the 𝗬𝗂𝗧𝗏lings, ranging from Junior all the way to Wendy. Then she glanced up at 𝗬𝗲𝗏 as the giant turtle had given her a very blushed expression as he watched his kids actually call Izumi more of a mother figure than Peach herself was. And as she glanced up into his eyes, he nodded at her as he pulled an arm away from Junior whilst pushing him into the middle of the group of 𝗬𝗂𝗧𝗏s as Izumi slowly but surely moved into their group hug. And with some slight twitching and flinching from how the 𝗬𝗂𝗧𝗏lings immediately jumped up to hug her as well, a new set of feelings had brewed up that she hadn't felt in years. Years had passed since she had ever felt any kind of love in this kind of way, same with how 𝗬𝗲𝗏 was still blushing as she leaned into his side. And with the kids hugging her from below, one of them looks up at her before they noticed her very confused expression as then tears brewed up in her eyes. And it was ironically Roy who had actually noticed the tears slowly falling from her eyes as she sniffled softly, garnering the attention of 𝗬𝗲𝗏. As the giant turtle had looked at Izumi, he found her body trembling as one of her hands pulled up to her mouth as she tried to muffle her own sound as he gave his kids a look to move away from them. With the kids listening to him, he pulls Izumi away from his kids as she slowly sniffles even more. 𝗬𝗲𝗏 then softly rubbed her back, and kept his hand from moving past her upper back just under her neck as the girl slowly fell to her knees as she wrapped her arms around her chest. She bent her body towards the ground as tears came out in droves as she let out a loud wail of sadness as she tried and failed to wipe away the tears from her eyes as 𝗬𝗲𝗏 asked her his own question. What's wrong? Did the kids and I do something wrong to trigger something? 𝗬𝗏𝗏 asked curious. No. Why you all didn't do anything wrong. Sniff I just haven't had tea, this kind of love given to me in years. Izumi said as she looked at the ground. What do you mean by that? Didn't your mother give you this kind of love? 𝗬𝗏𝗏 asked concerned. And not really. She just coddled me and didn't want for me to become a hero. She didn't support that dream. Izumi said as 𝗬𝗏𝗏 just looked at the ground with a very blank expression. Your mother didn't believe in your wish of becoming a hero? 𝗬𝗏𝗏 asked as Izumi nodded. She didn't want me to become a hero. Said it was too dangerous? Izumi said, as she felt more tears falling from her eyes. 𝗬𝗏𝗏 then pulled her into a hug as she felt his warmth bask over her entire form. And in a complete change of personality, 𝗬𝗏𝗏 softly pats her head as her entire form trembled as tears fell from her eyes even more. All before 𝗬𝗏𝗏 heard something that he believed was extremely adorable, as he felt her wings come out from behind her back and wrap around him. Exclamation point. 𝗬𝗏𝗏's eyes widen as he hears Izumi begin to purr in seeming happiness. He glances behind Izumi's back before finding a long green and black scaled tail wagging back and forth slowly as the two stayed in the hug for a while longer with the 𝗬𝗂𝗧𝗏lings watching from afar. Izumi finally stopped crying as she looked up at 𝗬𝗏𝗏 before a thought occurred to her whilst she stopped herself from crying even more. Why do I even care what they think of me? For all I know they really just want to use me for other things. Izumi thought before retracting it. I shouldn't think like that, they have done literally nothing to me. I guess that was the more wary version of my mind talking. I thought I got rid of that a year ago. Izumi thought again before shaking her head. As much as I would love to keep this hug going, I think we should do something, 𝗬𝗏𝗏 said, as everyone walked over to where Luigi's dead corpse laid on the ground. Izumi looked at the body with what appeared to be sadness in her eyes. Just in the nick of time, Luigi had noticed everything she had saw in the Mushroom Kingdom and decided to make a decision without his brother's say in it. Doing something that he truly wanted for the first time instead of staying in Mario's shadow and having a victory over their enemy similar to how it had always been for the two. Are you going to revive him? Izumi asked as 𝗬𝗏𝗏 looked at her. He'll be another threat to my kingdom. I should burn the body, 𝗬𝗏𝗏 said, his tone final but his body not doing anything. Revive him just this once. As a payment for saving my life. Izumi said as 𝗬𝗏𝗏 looked at her. Had you taken that meat cleaver, you would have transformed into that dragon form you had earlier, correct? 𝗬𝗏𝗏 asked, as Izumi nodded. I was fully prepared for Mario to kill me when I had my back turned. I never expected Luigi to take the cleaver for me though. Izumi said, looking down. For saving your life, I shall grant this. But let it be known, this will serve as a lesson for you, Izumi. Never, under any circumstances, let your guard be lowered in front of an enemy, more so when they are cornered. When someone is cornered and they are desperate, they are far more dangerous. Bowser said, pulling his wand out and waving it about. A rainbow color moved from the wand before Bowser leaned over the body of Luigi as the rainbow colors moved along the corpse. Then as the rainbow colors sunk into Luigi's skin, Izumi heard the spell that Bowser was using and felt like she should learn it. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Bowser said softly as Luigi's body softly rose into the air. As the flow of wind moved about the body of Luigi, his hat fluttered from his head before being pushed away from it as the wound on his head closed back up. The blood that had been caked on Izumi's back as well as the ground around them had then traveled back into the green plumber suit-wearing man's head before the rainbow colors subsided. Luigi's body twitched slightly before he groaned a bit before sitting upright to look at Izumi and Bowser, especially more so the 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗵𝗧. Standing up and moving away from the group, he breathed in softly whilst preparing himself in a fighting stance. That was when he found Izumi standing not far away from the 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏 and Bowser as she slowly walked up to him. Feeling himself become more wary of the young woman, he stayed still. That was when she pulled him into a hug, causing him to freeze in place as he glanced over at Bowser, who was looking away from him but had his eye on the plumber. "Am I alive?" he asked, before Izumi pulled away from him. This is a lesson for me. You took the hit that was meant to kill me. I had a spell on my body that activated upon my death, which is why I look more like Bowser," Izumi said, as she revealed her new appendages. This has to be a daydream. I was at it," Luigi said, as Izumi nodded. "I asked Bowser to revive you," Izumi said, looking at him softly with a smile. "But we are enemies. I could be coming back to have a rematch," Luigi said, looking into Izumi's green-slitted eyes. "I know this is a one-time thing. The next time you fight us and if you die, there is no coming back," Izumi said as Luigi thought about it. "Bowser, when you revived yourself against me and a Mario back in the day, why did you only come back as a dry Bowser?" Luigi asked, looking at the 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏. "It was how I set up my body to be revived. I can regenerate any bodily damage dealt to my skin, muscles as well as nervous system over the course of a week. It was only a matter of time before I can use the spell again," Bowser said as Luigi nodded. "Sorry for Mario's brutality on your kids," Luigi said, taking his hat from the air and putting it back on his head. "You are forgiven, but not Mario. He tried to kill my children and killed Izumi. He will suffer the consequences of taking her life from my people. Just know that from here on out, the Mushroom Kingdom no longer needs to fear my presence in the worlds. I will stay within my world but will use the other worlds in order to gain supplies for survival," Bowser said, walking away. "Are you telling the truth? How can I believe you?" Luigi asked, slightly shocked. "Because it appears as though Princess Peach doesn't reciprocate the love I give her. I can see that now. Besides, I have someone else that I can ask to marry me. After all, where we live, it's a place for outcasts. A kingdom of outcasts within a world that places us into that category," Bowser said as he walked back towards his castle. "See you later?" Izumi asked, with a very pained expression. "Yes, I hope you help him. He really needs it," Luigi said, leaving World 8. "You don't need to tell me twice," Izumi said, with a pout as she walked to catch up with Bowser and the 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏. 0W0? Over the course of the next week, Izumi and those of the Koopa Kingdom were set to build it back up to their full might. Izumi had taken charge of the position Bowser had as the trainer for those who wished to join his army and help him protect his kingdom from outside forces who wished to do them harm. Izumi had taken such a shine to the position as his right-hand woman of his army that she had taught each and every single member of his people humility, wisdom as well as kindness towards others. She got it into their heads that it doesn't have to be an enemy that they face on the battlefield, they have to show respect. But also, those who have come before them, as well as those in higher positions of power. It was a long process of a few weeks, but everyone was happier than what happened during the latest war. Those who were injured by the Mario brothers had gotten out of the hospitals that Izumi had helped create to make sure that those injured could get the medical help they required. They had also taken on some new recruits from the Mushroom Kingdom who had seen through the lies that Princess Peach had told them about Bowser. Those who saw her as nothing more than a tyrant who wanted to take control of all the worlds that had once belonged to Bowser's kingdom. She was in the middle of training some of the new recruits to teach them to cover one another's weaknesses when Bowser came outside of the castle for the first time in the last week. The king had been so focused on making sure that his people could live their lives in peace and without being attacked so hard that you could see the bags under his eyes from the lack of sleep he got. Many new laws as well as places built by him and 𝗵𝗃 to make sure that his people had everything they needed in order to live their lives without having to fear from the Mario brothers attacking again. The king looked as though he wanted a break from everything as Izumi told those who were training to go take a break and have the rest of the week off in order to rest. With them leaving as fast as they could to have a break, Izumi walked over to Bowser as she sat down on the grass next to the Koopa King. They had taken their forces into World 6 in order to train them due to the terrain as well as how it was perfect for them to train without being seen. Not only that, but it was within the territories that Peach signed on the treaty between their kingdoms that allowed Bowser to hold onto certain worlds for him to use as he saw fit. This week has been tiring on my body. I may be in my prime of living, but that doesn't mean that I don't want a break from time to time, Bowser said, as he glanced over at Izumi who smiled at him. That's only something that everyone feels, it's exhaustion, Bowser. But I personally think that you should leave the laws in the hands of 𝗵𝗃 for a while. He's raised you long enough to know what to do. How about we do something by ourselves? Just the two of us? Izumi asked as Bowser snorted. What, are you asking me out on a date? Bowser asked with a very off attitude. Do you not want T2? Izumi asked, looking up at him. I would like to have some time off from work. But what about my people? They look to me for guidance and protection. I can't leave them without my presence for too long, Bowser said worriedly. Just tell them that you're taking a break from being king for a few days and that you'll come back stronger than before. You're experiencing burnout. I'm surprised you hadn't experienced it sooner, Izumi said, rubbing his thighs since she was so short. I guess we can go to World 10, that place has a hot spring that we can use to relax. Thank you for suggesting it, Izumi, Bowser said, patting her head. She leaned into his touch as her tail wagged behind her, slowly appreciating the love he gave her. He noticed this before pulling her to sit on his shoulder, something that Izumi had blushed at before, softly using her wings to wrap around his head in order to keep her there. He stood up before walking towards the castle to make an announcement to his entire kingdom from World 𝗧𝗍's main castle. As Bowser set up the call towards the entire Koopa Kingdom, Izumi made sure to keep herself out of frame so he could speak to his subjects. Didn't want them to know who he was going to World 10 with now, did she? Not that she cared if they knew, but she'd rather not let people know that both of them were heading there together aside from Junior, since the boy would be left in the capable hands of 𝗵𝗃. As Bowser announced to his kingdom about where he was going, Izumi smiled to herself at how he could make himself so admirable. She knew that his forces would defend his honor with their lives. If he were injured enough to where he couldn't fight, they'd give their lives for him. So watching as all of them looked at him in awe, happiness and some fear for where he was going, made her heart clench. She even saw some children happily looking at him with stars in their eyes. Just know that with my presence being gone from the king's throne, my son Bowser Jr. and 𝗵𝗃 will be taking control until I return. I hope you all enjoy your few days without me being here to protect you all. I am proud of each and every one of you for how you have turned out from when I first trained you all, Bowser said, ending the call. Taking a deep breath, Bowser called his ship over to the two as they climbed aboard it and took off towards World 10. Izumi softly looked at the gathering stars that moved across the sky as she glanced over at Bowser, who had his clawed paws on the railing of the ship looking off into the known universe. He then looked at her with a tilt of his head as he smiled at her and softly pulled her into his side as the two stood looking at the multiple planetoids they had passed by in order to head to World 10. How did you come across World 10, Bowser? Izumi asked, looking up at him. It was something I found on my journey across the universe. Long before I found you in the Mushroom Kingdom, back when I and my army had taken over the entire universe, Well, not the entire thing, but the most of it. It was our greatest feat of strength and power we've ever done, Bowser said, with a soft expression on his face. Can you turn into your human form, Bowser? Izumi asked, as Bowser looked at her confused before nodding. As a red and yellow glow took over his form, he was replaced with a man who wore a vest over his chest and a short yellow tail with spiked edges. His shell sat on his back but not on the front of his body, as the large spikes still protruded from his back before his eyes kept their fiery glow of red as he looked down at her. The height he had went from 10 feet down to around only 6 feet 2 inches, or in centimeters for you metric system people, 300 centimeters in his true form and 192 centimeters in his humanoid form. He looked at Izumi's eyes as her emerald-slitted eyes stared into his crimson-red pupils. Her nictating membrane blinked for her as the two slowly closed the distance towards one another for all but a moment before the ship softly docked at a wooden dock, forcing the two away from one another. Izumi had an incredibly large blush on her face as she followed an equally blushing Bowser off the ship and made their way towards the hot springs. The two took in the sights as they saw how it looked eerily similar to the home world's version of it for Izumi. She placed a palm on the bamboo tree that was sitting outside of the building as the two entered the place as they talked with the person in charge of the building. Once they paid for everything, the two of them entered the springs together since they'd rather stick together, and with Bowser relaxing in the hot tub area of the baths, Izumi sat down next to him. He wrapped an arm around her as she blushed slightly into his side as the king of the 𝗧𝗵𝗲s smirked down at her. He then rubbed her head softly as she leaned into his affectionate rubbing as she let out a small moan of bliss, catching the two of them off guard. As Izumi's face became a blushing mess, she didn't move away from the hand that was getting all the right places on her head that she didn't want to scratch. And the two just enjoyed the quietness of the baths before they got out of the tubs and moved over to where they could wash themselves. Izumi stood on the opposite side of the baths as she looked at Bowser as he cleaned his front and legs. She felt her core begin to heat up as she walked over before using the soapy sponge she held in her hands to squeeze them onto her chest. She knew that boys and men liked big chests, but she wanted to see Bowser's reaction to her doing this. By the time she got behind him, she found Bowser looking at her from the mirror in front of him as she paused before softly placing the sponge on the shell of his back. He groaned softly as she scrubbed all the dirt and grime from his shell before she got each and every crevice of it cleared of the gunk and dirt. When she used the water to clean it off, she found Bowser shivering slightly from the cold touch of it before she decided to go through with her plan. Removing her towel, she let it hit the ground with a loud smack. Bowser heard this and was about to turn around to see what happened when he felt two large pillowy orbs on his back. He didn't risk looking behind himself to see what Izumi was doing as he sat ramrod straight. He trembled slightly as he felt the orbs move up and down his back before hearing the soft grunts of Izumi moving her chest up and down his back, through the crevices of his shell all the way onto each and every spike. That was when he heard it, a soft but very clear moan coming from her mouth. Ah, Izumi moaned softly, hoping to hide it entirely but couldn't. Izumi, what are you doing? He asked as he looked down at his towel covering his legs. What does it all feel like? She asked, her face slowly gaining a smile. It feels like growling. You're doing something naughty, Bowser said, turning his head slightly. 𝗧𝗵𝗃. Bowser looked over his shoulder to see Izumi's bed of hair on her head, her horns sticking out like a sore thumb from the hair as if they were trees sticking to her head. He then glanced down her body to see her bat-like leathery wings sticking out to the sides but pointed backwards and her tail wagging back and forth in a very lustful fashion. Then he watched as her rear moved back and forth, side to side as she rubbed her orbs of flesh on her chest around the last spike on his back. He could feel the erection he was beginning to form as he turned around to face Izumi as he found her standing there holding her breasts in her fisted hands. Looking up at him in confusion before he placed his palms on her shoulders and his eyes were covered in shadows as he lifted her into the air and placed her on his lap. Izumi could feel the raging hard-on he had through his towel as it rose ever higher behind her rear. Looking up at his eyes, she found that his pupils were dilated enough to which he would only see her. She then decided to do something to entice him even further. She may be a 15-year-old girl, But as a dragon, that meant she was far older, at least in her own eyes. He had shown his true colors to her the day she watched him help her get her out of her own panic attack a year and a half ago. And over the year of training he gave her, she had fallen so deeply in love with him that she couldn't hold back anymore as she placed her hands on his cheeks and pulled him into a passionate kiss. Reciprocating the kiss, 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗪 pulled her into his chest, feeling her orbs of flesh on her chest squish against his pectorals. Dry humping her rear, he let his towel fall to the ground as Izumi felt his fleshy tool for reproduction rub against her bare ass as she moved it up and down his phallus as well. Their breathing became labored as they continued to give the other pleasure as they pulled away from the kiss in order to get a breath of air. 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗪 then lowered his head to her breasts as he took one into his mouth and began to suck on it softly before using his teeth to pinch the nipples. Ah, Izumi moaned softly as she held his head in her chest. She leaned herself backwards, her back arching and lifting her already impressive bust even higher so that 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗪 could get even more of them. Although what the two were unaware of was how Izumi's back arching backwards had lifted herself up and had placed her dripping pussy right in front of the tip of his phallus. And as soon as she lowered herself a bit, she felt him entering her, causing her to wince slightly before accidentally shaking her ass a bit before the entire thing pushed right into her body. 𝗧𝗏. Izumi let out a breathy moan of pleasure and pain as 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗪 felt her fold squeeze his phallus for everything that he was worth. This wasn't how I was hoping to do this, but I guess I can do this. 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗪 groaned as he held Izumi tightly by her hips. This hurts, Izumi said as she moaned slightly. Do you want me to pull out? 𝗬𝗲𝗪 asked, his breathing slowing but panting heavily. No, I don't want to stop. I can do this, Izumi said, as she shook her hips left and right slowly. Feeling his phallus move and twitch inside of her, Izumi let out moans that were filled with love and affection. She then turned her face to look at 𝗬𝗲𝗪 as the 𝗧𝗵𝗃 king stared into her slitted emerald eyes with nothing more than love and affection. She opened her mouth to let out a moan again when 𝗬𝗲𝗪 pulled her into a kiss, stopping the moan from being too loud as he pulled out slowly before pushing back and causing her to moan even more into his mouth. She placed her hands on his shoulders, as her nails raked across them softly as she grunted before 𝗬𝗲𝗪 slowly increased his pace. The pain she was feeling at the moment soon began to transform into pleasure as she then pulled herself up with her rear and slammed it down. She moaned out really loud this time as her eyes, right where her pupil should have been, gained a faint pink color for a second before she shook her head. She then looked into 𝗬𝗲𝗪's eyes again as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 saw the hearts forming in her pupils as their speed increased with Izumi bouncing harder on his throbbing member. So much for a first date, 𝗬𝗲𝗪 called out, as Izumi giggled slightly with a moan. I wasn't expecting, oh gosh, this either. But I hope it's feeling good, Izumi said, before 𝗬𝗲𝗪 stood up holding her on his phallus. Izumi called out, as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 then railed her quickly. Her breasts flipped and flopped in the air as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 began to thrust fast and heavily into her pussy. It dripped with her juices as she climaxed multiple times with each thrust. He had done as her face went from lust-driven to completely fucked senseless. Her body twitched as he continued to push in and out of her, sheathing his phallus and unsheathing it many times before he felt as though he was about to reach his limit. Where do you want it? 𝗬𝗲𝗪 called out, groaning. I don't know. Before Izumi called out, her tongue falling out. Fine then, don't blame me for what happens, 𝗬𝗲𝗪 called out as he pushed his phallus deep inside her. He continued to thrust inside her, this time at a very fast pace as Izumi's face had showed all the bliss she was feeling. All until she felt his phallus immediately push deep into her core and penetrate her womb as he released all of his pent-up frustration deep into her body as she let out a moan of pure bliss and pleasure. Izumi screamed as 𝗬𝗲𝗪 grunted. Izumi stayed on his phallus as she felt each spurt of his semen entering her deepest part. It was so vast and large, she couldn't help but stick her tongue out and hold a peace sign at the mirror, her breasts heaving up and down with each breath she took in. Within her body, her womb had become so full that it expanded slightly before on the outside of her body it began to bulge outwards, something that she took notice of and placed a hand there once her mind came back. *kick. *this mashing. Izumi slurred out as Bowser slowly pulled out of her. Smut over. Laying on the ground, the two stared at the ceiling as Izumi slowly but surely crawled over to him and laid on his extended arm. Looking at the ceiling, the two just thought about what they had done before Bowser looked at her. Izumi looked at him with a scared look before placing her hand over the bulge in her stomach and glanced around the room with her eyes as Bowser saw her expression. I can use magic to make sure that you don't get pregnant? Bowser said, as Izumi nodded. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 good? Izumi asked as Bowser thought about it. You're the only human woman I've done it with. I did it with a 𝗵𝗃 woman back in the day to get Junior, so, if I had to choose between the two of you, you were the better lay. Bowser said, smirking at her. 𝗳𝗏𝗃𝗧𝗟𝗘. That was my first time. Izumi said, rubbing her arm. Don't worry, I will make sure that we have our date here. Bowser said as he panted softly. Will we do this more? Izumi asked as Bowser looked at her. Do you want to do that more? He questioned as Izumi looked away with a nod. I want to hear you say it, Bowser said, his voice going into a powerful tone. I want to do it again soon, Izumi said as Bowser nodded. I will do what I can to get some time for us, Bowser said, as he leaned over and grabbed her towel. Come on, we have some more time here before we have to leave in a couple days, Bowser said, as Izumi nodded. 𝗧𝗏𝗪? Off in another universe, a young man wearing a red cap on his head backwards was shown rushing through the streets of his home. He held a microphone in his left hand and the hand of another person who he had rescued from his universe. Behind them, coming ever closer at high speeds, was a dark mass that had two people that he knew and loved equally, but the girl had a weird glitchy twitch in her body as she called out to him. 𝗬𝗏𝗵𝗃 boyfriend. I want to become one with you. The girl called out as the purple-haired friend of the one called boyfriend called out to him. Come on. We need to jump into another universe. This one is gone, she said, opening a portal. You better not leave me again. A boy wearing a green jacket and brown khaki pants called out, just as glitched out as the girl in a red short dress. I'm sorry, Pico. Girlfriend. I need to help the other universes before it's too late. He called out to the two before leaping into the portal. Unaware that the dark mass followed him into the universe he was about to enter, Izumi and Bowser left the Springs Baths area as they changed their clothing in the bedroom they had been given by the staff. Once they were prepared to go out and have a nice dinner with one another, they left the Springs Hotel and walked down the streets in the dark night as they found a small restaurant to eat something. Entering the place, they found a seat for both of them and began to order their meals for the evening as they looked into one another's eyes. I'm sure that why you want to know what happened back at the Springs? Izumi said as she stuttered softly. I may want to know about that, but I'd like to talk about that later, he said, waving her worry away before pulling out his wand and using a spell on her. What did you just do to me? Izumi asked, concerned. I just made sure that my semen didn't impregnate you. I'd rather not have another child so soon before we actually get married, Bowser said with a soft expression. Wouldn't that make it a shotgun wedding? Izumi asked as she adopted a thinking pose with her fingers on her chin. And that is why I fell for you, Bowser said with a soft smile on his face. You fell for me? Izumi asked, confused and curious. Yes. From the moment I first saw you. I knew that you'd either be a friend or foe, but as time went on, I started to notice you more as a woman, rather than a young girl who was the age of my son, Bowser said, looking away with a small blush on his face. Oh gosh. I don't know what my mother would say to this, Izumi said, holding her hands on her head. You already shown that you don't really appreciate her words to you. Do you still show care for her after everything she has done towards you? Bowser asked, concerned. She's my mom. I can't just lose my love for her. She didn't abandon me like most other people, Izumi said, before continuing. She may have treated me as G-glass, but I preferred that over abandonment, Izumi said as Bowser nodded. I was abandoned at birth, so I would know what it's like to grow up without any kind of parents being around. If I had a parent other than 𝗵𝗃 around, I might not be as evil as I am right at this moment, although, with your presence I might stop becoming an evil monster, Bowser said, as Izumi looked up at him. "You're not a monster, 𝗬𝗲𝗏. You are a man who is just looking after your own kingdom. Not only that, but you have an entire family that you either adopted or had with one of your subjects. Junior is the one with the subjects that I'm referring to, but even then, you're just doing your best to find the best mother figure for them all. And if I'm the one to be that motherly figure for them, I wouldn't mind," Izumi said, smiling at him. 𝗬𝗲𝗏 stared at her smile with nothing more than a growing blush from his neck to the top of his face. Her smile was so genuine as well as happy that he couldn't help but reach over to her, lift her into the air and place her on his lap and kiss her passionately, causing her to giggle into the kiss. She reciprocated the kiss though, which made his ego grow even further before he set her back down so she could return to her seat. "I hope our dinner gets out here soon. I'd like something to eat after what happened earlier," Izumi said as she giggled softly. "I'd like to hear your voice giggling more often. It's something that brightens my day after a hard time at work," 𝗬𝗲𝗏 said with a soft expression. "I'd like to say that you two are looking like quite the couple. I have your katsudon made perfectly like you asked. And as for you, Mr. 𝗃𝗲𝗏, I have your chicken and steak cooked to just the way you asked as well as a side of salad," the waitress said as Izumi looked at her. "Thank you for bringing us the food, we were starving," Izumi said, with a hand rubbing the back of her head. "I can see that. It's so good to see such a loving relationship," the waitress said before leaving the two. Silence permeated from around the restaurant as the two ate in silence. Izumi appreciated the silent mood of the table as 𝗬𝗲𝗏 softly made sure that his manners were perfect for just her as he ate with regality. Izumi just ate like she normally would, soft and slow, in order to savor the taste that flowed within her mouth and got her taste buds all happy. By the time their dinner was over, the waitress came out with a piece of cake as she placed it on their table. "I have a red velvet cake with ice cream mixed within it. The frosting is cherry flavored and has a tint of cinnamon. I hope you both enjoyed your time at our restaurant," the waitress said, as 𝗬𝗲𝗏 held out a hand, causing the waitress to pause. "Take this, it's the least I could do for this fine establishment. It answered the call of both myself and my girlfriend," 𝗬𝗲𝗏 said with a happy smile, signing a check of coins. The waitress looked at the check for coins as she saw it was 2,000 coins being gifted to the restaurant as a personal tip. The woman just looked up at him before he gave her a few more coin stacks as he nodded at her. "Just to make your living a little bit better. After all, I am making sure that my lovely girlfriend can have the best night of her life." "On her first date?" 𝗬𝗲𝗏 said, as Izumi blushed. Thank you, Sir 𝗬𝗲𝗏. I can actually take care of my child with this. I hope you both have the greatest set of luck in your future," she said with a bow before leaving. "I'm surprised she didn't ask you out on the spot," Izumi said with a giggle. "Which is why I emphasizing the fact that you and I are together. I'd rather stick with you than anyone else," 𝗬𝗲𝗏 said, with a smirk as Izumi blushed and looked away. Stop being like that," she said with a pout. "Like what?" 𝗬𝗲𝗏 asked with a knowing smile. Being kind, it's throwing me off," Izumi said, taking a bite of her cake. After the two left the restaurant, they walked about World 10 in order to take in the view of the known galaxy that they were in. Izumi looked through the hundreds of galaxies that 𝗬𝗲𝗏 could project with his wand as Izumi looked for the Milky Way galaxy that belonged to her. But as they continued to search, 𝗬𝗲𝗏 felt something twitch in his mind, as though something was coming towards both him and Izumi, but kept it out of mind to make Izumi feel much better. All he knew was that the weird presence had entered his home, but it was oddly familiar to him. So he ignored it, believing that it was someone from his past who came to assist him with a project or something, as he kept assisting Izumi with finding her home galaxy. And soon enough they found the galaxy that she belonged to. It was surprising that it was billions of light years away from the mushroom galaxia supergalaxy. "I'm so far," Izumi said, with awe in her expression. "Yeah, I never thought you'd be a part of that galaxy. That was a galaxy that I passed over in my tenure as a villainous monster in the past, back when I was truly evil," 𝗬𝗏𝗏 said, as he held his chin with his hand. To think that W could have met F far sooner," Izumi muttered as she placed a finger at the Milky Way galaxy's location on the projection. The two smiled as 𝗬𝗏𝗏 placed his clawed hand behind her back and rubbed it softly as they watched multiple stars blast past the sky. Izumi smiled at it as she leaned her head on his shoulder. The time together for the two was great, as Bowser mentally thought to bring her back here sometime on another date. She would love to visit this place again in the future when their schedules made time for the two of them. Alright, I think I've had enough with this presence that's been following us. Bowser growled as he turned around and transformed into his more feral and true form. What are you talking about? Izumi asked, turning around with Bowser. Not too far from the two, a large black mass stood. It didn't have a face, but it clearly had multiple sets of eyes as it glared at the two of them with nothing more than hatred and malicious intent. Bowser, however, was the first one to react as it extended a long tendril at the two with extreme speeds that the two picked up on. Barrier! He called out, as he projected a magical barrier around himself and Izumi. What the heck? Why did it attack us? Izumi asked, as Bowser glared at the potential threat. I don't know, but I think this won't be the last time we see this thing, Bowser said, taking a deep breath. The dark blob of mass just turned to look at Bowser before he blasted it away with his fire breath, and within seconds the blob of darkness had disappeared from their view. But Bowser had a bad feeling about that thing since he'd never seen it before in the galaxy. In all his years of exploring the known universe, not once had he come across such a creature. He glanced over at Izumi, who definitely never saw it before, as he placed her in a bridal carry as he rushed back to his ship. I have a bad feeling about this. Let's head back to the kingdom. I don't like what I just destroyed, Bowser said as the two disappeared from view, unaware that the dark mass was now attacking the civilians of the world. 𝗧𝗫𝗍? Junior was not having a good time at the moment, for everything that he prepared himself for. He was not prepared for a monstrous blob of darkness to attack his father's kingdom whilst he was gone at World 10 for a small vacation. Not only that, but this darkness had managed to take his siblings and most of the kingdom with it. Whoever brought this thing here needed to leave so that it wouldn't take over this place before it was too late. But he just had no clue as to who would bring such a being here. As he rushed through the kingdom, he was already feeling like a failure as he tried his best to use his magic to make himself incapable of being infected by whatever that muck had been when they tried to grab him. Thankfully, his father taught him that barrier spell that could be used in a 360-degree orb around himself a few years ago, otherwise he would have fallen to this weird muck far sooner than he had. Looking deep into the eyes of the monstrosity in front of himself, he couldn't help but notice a familiar set of eyes deep within it, 𝗵𝗃. The wizard had defended him from the muck at the start and was absorbed into it completely. Now it had his magical powers at its disposal, and he couldn't do anything to stop it from taking over the entire kingdom of the 𝗵𝗃s. As much as he hated it, he needed to get the assistance of the Mushroom Kingdom in order to try and take this threat down without his father's presence. It would help him to become his very own man, since it would show his father that he can protect the kingdom when he wasn't present at all. But that was thrown out the window when the entire kingdom was taken over in literal seconds. He couldn't even create a spell to save anyone. That was how fast it was. Now though, he was rushing through the forest on his clown helicopter as he tried his best to get to the Mushroom Kingdom. Racing through the forest, he was about to turn down another way towards World 7 when a large ship appeared right next to his clown helicopter, and as he looked up, he found Izumi holding a hand out to him. Jumping out of his vehicle, he grabbed her arm as she pulled him up, and the ship took off farther away from the kingdom. Junior? What happened? Bowser's voice rang out behind Izumi. 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗃 took everyone. I don't know where it came from. I couldn't save anyone, Junior said, tears finally falling from his eyes. We came across the same thing, Junior. But I need you to tell me what happened, Bowser said, softly this time whilst hugging his son. 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗃 appeared out of nowhere. I got 𝗧𝗵𝗃, Larry, 𝗧𝗪𝙢, 𝗪𝙢, Lemmy, Iggy, one even Wendy, Junior said, as Bowser looked downright distraught. And not them. No. I will not let this stand, Bowser growled as he stood to glare down at the muck rushing towards the ship on the ground. Bowser! Izumi called out, rushing to Bowser as he prepared to leap at the dark energy rushing towards the ship. I have to get them back. 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗃 kids! Bowser yelled as he struggled to break free from Izumi's grip around him. Bowser! That thing will just absorb you into it. We need the Mario brothers to help us with this. Izumi called out, reluctantly. I won't rely on those damn plumbers to help. They tried to kill them. Bowser growled out as he struggled to jump. Bowser, what about Junior? What do you think will happen if he sees you get taken by that thing too? It will break his morale. It will break his heart that even you were absorbed by it. Izumi yelled as Bowser just let the tears fall from his. I leave my K-Kingdom for one day, and this happens? Bowser cried as Izumi held him close to her. We need to make sure that the Mario brothers weren't absorbed into it. We need their assistance with fighting whatever this threat is. Izumi said calmly. How can you be so calm right now? Junior asked, walking over to them, tears falling from his eyes. Because we need to be level-headed. I know that this thing has to have a weakness. If we can just figure it out, I'm sure that we can get everyone back. Izumi said with a determined expression on her face. I'm sad for everyone's loss as well, but we need to push on for them in order to get them back. Izumi said, as Bowser nodded with Junior reluctantly agreeing. The ship traveled faster than the 𝗵𝗃 could keep up as they moved across the sky at Mach speeds. Within no time, the trio had arrived at the Mushroom Kingdom, and they were surprised that the princess's castle was actually still standing as millions of toads had fought against the weird black 𝗵𝗃. Apparently, the princess saw the black 𝗵𝗃 coming and created a counter-strategy for it already, and she saw the ship coming fast as her people prepared to defend against him as well. When the ship got low enough to the balcony, Izumi, Bowser and Junior leaped out of it as the Mario brothers walked up behind the princess and stood in front of her. The two blocked the trio from the woman as Mario looked at Izumi with nothing more than a soft glare, the same for Luigi. What was your plan this time, Bowser? Throw this 𝗵𝗃 at us in order to force us into servitude? Peach questioned with a glare. I have no idea what you're talking about. My kingdom was destroyed by that 𝗵𝗃 while I was out on it, Bowser said, a small blush entering his face before shaking it off. Yeah, like anyone would go out on a date with you. Peach growled. Actually, it was Mama that went out on a date with him. Junior said, as Izumi blushed crimson. Mamma mia. Luigi said as he looked at Izumi and Bowser. I'm not even going to ask about your sexual life. Come on, if it wasn't your fault that this 𝗵𝗃 is attacking the castle, then you can help us with your magic. Peach said, allowing the trio inside her castle. What happened to your kingdom, Bowser? Luigi asked, curious. I returned to find it completely taken over by a weird glitchy mass. It was as though a weird technological mass had transformed my kingdom from what it was into a heresy. Junior was barely able to escape it before we grabbed him from the forest, Bowser said as Luigi winced. Darn, I never thought that why your kingdom would be destroyed like that. Luigi said, as Bowser began to tear up again. What's wrong, Bowser? Mario asked, a little miffed at his presence. My children were absorbed into it. Why do you think I would be crying? Bowser growled at him. Bowser, as much as I want to let you fight him right now, we need their help at the moment, Izumi said, placing her hand on his arm. Sorry, I'm just trying to get over their absorption. It's hard to know my children were taken over that easily, Bowser said, wiping a tear away. I've been researching this weird black darkness 𝗵𝗃 for the entirety that it was in both of our kingdoms. But I just haven't been able to find a way to get through the darkness and bring those who were absorbed by it back. I needed your guys' magic in order to do it, Peach said, as Izumi nodded with Bowser and Junior. With that, the group went off with Peach to try and research the darkness as much as possible. And they would keep at it for hours until one of the Toad High Guard entered the room with as much speed as he could. Mario and Luigi walked over to them and asked what was going on. That was when the High Guard had given the information he could before rushing back out to hold the last line of defense as the Mario brothers rushed back towards the three most powerful magicians in the world. By the time the two entered the room, they found Bowser, Junior, Izumi and Peach holding a small toad in their arms that had once been infected with the dark 𝗵𝗃 on their body completely dispelled. Peach had the look of pure ecstasy on her face as she looked at the others and thanked them for their assistance with creating the spell required to take care of their newfound enemy. Princess, we need to leave now, Mario called out as Luigi panted heavily. What's wrong, Mario? Peach asked, rushing over. The 𝗵𝘃 has broken through the lines of defense. We have to evacuate the castle, Mario said, before he heard movement behind him. And before anyone could see what was about to happen, Mario and Luigi pushed the princess out of the way before a glitched toad had grabbed the two brothers with surprising strength and yanked them out of the room as Izumi immediately slammed the doors shut with her magic. Mario! Peach screamed as she beat on the door. 𝗬𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗍𝗍. Peach screamed. Princess, we have to go. That 𝗵𝘃 has gotten them infected. If we get infected then we won't be able to save them. Izumi called out as Peach just growled at her. None of this would have happened if you all hadn't come here. We were doing just fine without your presence. Peach screamed irrationally. Peach, we need to leave. Izumi called out as Peach glared at her. You are the reason why my life is a living hell. I won't allow you three to stay here any longer. Peach screamed as she held her heart-shaped wand at the trio. Her glare became even worse as her eyes became very feral and estranged. A red glow taking over her eyes as Izumi and Bowser pulled Junior away from the woman as they called the ship over to escape from the castle. Peach slowly walked over to them with a mad expression and the red glow in her eyes before she felt something grab her leg. Looking down and calming down from her apparent rage just long enough to realize something terribly wrong with this situation. Mario had appeared and he didn't have the best expression on his face as he struggled to stand back up, and the hand grabbing her leg was glitching. And Mario? Peach asked, hope filling her eyes. Princess, Mario called out as he was pulled back into the other room. Mario? Peach screamed as she rushed through the now open door. As the princess left the trio, Izumi, Bowser and Junior made it onto their ship before they took off for another world. The trio were wondering what in the hell caused Peach to react to the whole situation like that. She'd never done that before from how Bowser was reacting. But as they left the castle, they looked at it as the black dark 𝗵𝘃 was climbing all around it, causing it to glitch out before the entire structure had fallen apart and crumbled to the ground. We need to get to a world where the dark 𝗵𝘃 hasn't taken control, Bowser said, flying the ship towards the east. 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏? Boyfriend and his only surviving ally from his universe and the other universes that they'd traveled made it through the portal. Looking around the dense mushroom forest, they walked around with nothing stopping them as they watched a floating boat fly past them towards the east. And as they looked off in the distance, they found something that broke their hearts. The castle that had once belonged to Princess Peach had fallen and crumbled as the darkness moved towards them. Boyfriend then rose his little microphone into the air, waving towards the floating ship, watching as it continued to fly past them before it stopped in the air. Just as Boyfriend was about to think that they were about to be abandoned, a large comical anchor fell from the ship, allowing him and his friend to climb up it. Once he and his friend had managed to climb on the anchor, it began to lift from the ground as they watched the ground become farther and farther away from their feet. When he reached the railing, both him and his friend were found being pulled up by a young woman with dark brown horns on her head that looked like small trees. A large figure driving the ship and a small boy who appeared similarly to the man at the helm as Boyfriend looked at them all with confusion. Beep boop? He asked as the girl tilted her head at him. What are you talking about? The girl asked. Sorry, was just getting into character. My name is Boyfriend. Can you tell me what happened here? He asked as the girl looked at him confusedly. Didn't you see what was happening to the princess's castle? The girl asked him. We did, but what happened? Boyfriend's friend asked her. The weird black 𝗵𝘃 took over the kingdom. Me, Bowser, and Junior are all that remain, the girl said before shaking her head. Sorry, but my name is Midoriya Izumi. Can I have your names? The girl, Izumi, asked after introducing herself. Well, my name is Boyfriend. This is my friend, 𝗵𝘃. We're trying to save all these alternate universes from this enemy that we've been fighting. We call it the darkness? Boyfriend said, looking into Izumi's eyes. Okay, did either of you two get corrupted or infected with the 𝗵𝘃? Izumi asked, concerned. For whatever reason, I'm completely immune to it. It only goes after cartoon characters. Boyfriend said, as Izumi looked over at Bowser and Junior. What? Izumi asked, confused. Anyone who is a cartoon character, meaning those who have television shows that are well known. Boyfriend supplied as Bowser and Junior gulped. What the shit? Izumi muttered as that meant every single person on the ship was able to be corrupted. The ship sailed through the air as the group made their way towards a spot where they thought the darkness wouldn't find them as easily. Within hours, the group finally arrived at the edge of the known universe where they found the specter of the known galaxy/universe. 𝗬𝗓𝗍𝗍 stood before them as she floated softly in the air, taking in the group's appearance as she then glanced over at Bowser, who looked downright miserable. I feel as though I am woefully unaware of what is currently happening, 𝗬𝗓𝗍𝗍 said as boyfriend looked up at her. Beep boop, he called out, holding a microphone out to her. You wish to rap battle me? I've never rap battled before, 𝗬𝗓𝗍𝗍 said, glancing at the relatively tall young man. Beep, boyfriend called out, as Izumi shook her head at the taller boy. 𝗬𝗓𝗍𝗍, do you think you can assist us in defeating the darkness that has been consuming the galaxy? Izumi asked, looking at the specter. I have no idea what this darkness is, but I should know that it's slowly taking control of the known galaxy as a whole, 𝗬𝗓𝗍𝗍 said, as Bowser growled to himself. If only we had Peach here, all of us together would have been powerful enough to banish that darkness creature back to the void. Bowser grumbled as 𝗬𝗓𝗍𝗍 looked at him confused. What happened to Peach? The same for Mario and Luigi? 𝗬𝗓𝗍𝗍 asked, curious. The darkness consumed them, now they're glitchy enemies that wish to do nothing more than destroy the known universe. Izumi said as she stood in front of the group. That is terrible, they were going to be the last line of defense against this threat. If they were grabbed earlier, then that means that all hope is lost, 𝗬𝗓𝗍𝗍 said, as it was boyfriend's turn to look distraught. There's nothing we can do to stop the darkness? Junior asked, confused. No, the darkness will continue to consume the known galaxy and into the multitude of universes. And when that happens, it will follow the blue-haired boy into whatever universe he heads to after this, 𝗬𝗓𝗍𝗍 said as Bowser and Junior glared at the blue-haired boy. I had no idea that it followed me, boyfriend said, as Izumi was now sitting down on the deck. She was currently thinking of a way to cast the darkness out of the known galaxy without causing any damage to it. The fact that this darkness followed boyfriend everywhere he went provided something that they could predict for if he were to leave their galaxy/universe. If he were to leave their universe, then that meant that he would be placing another one in danger of being consumed and assimilated into the darkness's power. Izumi looked at Bowser and Junior as she thought about what they could do to stop it. And she was drawing up a blank in order to stop the darkness from even consuming the entire universe itself. And when it got strong enough, it would be capable of traveling to other universes in order to consume and assimilate them into its overall power, thereby causing the entire macrocosm of the known multiverse to be destroyed. Meaning that if they could replicate what could essentially form an entire universe macrocosm, they might have a chance of either destroying the darkness itself or forcing it into the void. The main issue for this plan was, how in the world were they going to do this? Of all the people in the known galaxy/universe, Bowser and Junior were the only ones powerful enough to create a spell that was able to send it back into the void where it supposedly came from. And Izumi couldn't help but wonder how much power was needed in order to even do that. Bowser and Junior's powers with their magic would most definitely be required to make such a spell, but what would the cost of such a thing possibly be? As Izumi was wondering about these questions, Bowser and Junior finally stopped harassing boyfriend for his inability to plan ahead. Turning to look at Izumi, they found the girl sitting on the deck with an adopted thinking pose as they moved over to her, and as they sat down, boyfriend managed to get that rap battle. The trio had brainstormed together on how to create a spell strong enough to banish the darkness out of their universe that would subsequently return those who were once assimilated into the darkness back. So how should we go about this? Bowser asked, as Izumi pulled out her notebook. From the notes that we took on the tests we had done in order to pull someone from the power of the darkness, all we really needed to do was defeat them in battle. Although, we'd need to not touch any of the darkness, otherwise we'd just be slowly assimilated into its control. But the power of the spell would have a drawback that would make us hesitant to use it, Izumi said as she stared down at her notes. What is the drawback of such a spell being used? Junior asked, as Izumi hesitated before glancing at each of the two 𝗬𝗍𝗲s. W and I researched the drawbacks, they were far too high. Izumi said as she took a deep breath. In order to use a spell like this, we would need to give up something that we love too much to lose. Izumi said, looking at both Bowser and Junior. The looks on their faces were stoic, but at the same time, they were worried. They didn't outright show it on their faces, but on the inside, they were worried about what could possibly happen to the ones they loved the most. Especially the fact that Izumi's place in their lives was something they really didn't want to lose at this point of their lives. Especially with how much she had helped out in making their kingdom safer to live. Her presence being gone from their lives would most probably force them back into their lives of villainy. Attempting to capture Princess Peach again and make her into Bowser's wife in order to help him give his children a motherly figure. And for Bowser, the Koopa King had been very worried because of his growing feelings for her since he had lost his love for Peach and had them replaced for Izumi instead. The fact that the young woman had caused such a change in his heart, in so little time, caused his heart to thump very quickly. Is there another spell that we can use in order to send the darkness away from here? Junior asked, looking at Izumi. Not that I was able to find. In order to find such a spell, we'd have to search for decades, and given the enemy we have, we don't have the time to check. Izumi said with a wince. I will not lose you shortly after I announced my love towards you. I will not stand for this, Bowser yelled, blasting fire into the sky. Bowser, it's the only way to save your reality. What, do you just want to have other realities suffer because of your love for me? Izumi called out to him. It would be far better than losing the love of my life. Bowser yelled back at her. Silence filled the area, as everyone, including Boyfriend and Rosalina, looked over at the King of the Koopas with confusion. Junior looked at his father with great confusion as well as worry. The king had never gotten this furious, nor had he been this protective of someone before. Especially with him and his siblings. Sure, he protected them like a father should, but at the same time, he showed Junior and his siblings all the love he could give, thinking about them more than himself. But to see him act selfishly like this was new for him. Especially when it pertained to Izumi, the green-haired Draconic girl who had literally sacrificed her human life in order to protect their kingdom. Izumi, however, was staring at Bowser in complete shock before she stood up, tears falling from her eyes. Is that why you feel for me? She asked, her mind running at millions of miles an hour, trying to see if he was lying. I have literally never lied since I met you, Izumi. From the moment you had your first panic attack, I had slowly been falling for you, and it hit me harder than my love for Peach ever could. Now that I have to lose something I love, someone I love more than anything else, you are the one thing in my life that has been positive, aside from my children and kingdom, Bowser said, before clarifying for Junior. But what about stopping this evil from making anyone else's lives a living hell? We should protect them as well. We can't give up on them, Izumi said as Bowser sighed. I don't want to lose you. You are the one thing in my life that I would hate to lose. Your kindness, your compassion, your affection. It's something that I haven't had since before I adopted my children, Bowser said as Izumi thought about it. We can try to find a different solution, but I can't guarantee that we'd find one, Izumi said as Bowser nodded. 0W0? Hours passed by, and the group weren't even that closer to finding a new solution to stopping the darkness. They were in the middle of researching when a small Luma had flown over to Rosalina with terrifying news to the specter of the known cosmos. The darkness had been getting closer every day, and it was consuming everything in its sight, all searching for them all in order to assimilate them into its powerful grasp. Izumi then stood up with the others not too long afterwards and prepared the ship for takeoff. As they prepared the ship for takeoff, they were completely unaware of how the Luma who had informed Rosalina about the darkness had a small dark spot on its back as it fluttered with the others. By the time they were preparing to take off into the galaxy, they were suddenly swarmed by thousands of Lumas as they attacked Rosalina and the others, and with Boyfriend and Pibby immune to the darkness, they leaped out of the way. All except for one of them. Bowser stood his ground before using his magic to pull the Lumas away from Rosalina's planet as he began to absorb their power into himself. Izumi got up from the ground as the ship flew off into the distance, and she used her magic to make her watch Bowser as he absorbed the millions of Lumas that had become infected with the darkness. tears slowly falling down her face, she watched as the Koopa King she had fallen in love with slowly become a glitching mess. And before she could even realize it, Junior was flying towards his father, screaming his name. Flying as fast as he could towards Bowser's position, a black tendril from the darkness assimilated Bowser had struck out towards Junior as time slowed down to a crawl. Junior felt as though he was about to be beheaded by this tendril, before something grabbed onto the tendril itself, revealing a glitchy yellow clawed hand as it tightened its grip over it. Father? Junior called out, as Bowser's voice glitched out in a strained tone. Get out of here, Junior. 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗲. Bowser growled as his face was slowly becoming assimilated with the glitchy mass. But what about you? How will we save you? Junior called out. Find a way. We'll hold the darkness off. Bowser growled out even more. I will find a way to save you. Junior called out, flying back towards the ship. And as Junior flew back towards the floating ship, in the background Bowser used all the magic he could. Pulling the muck away from his face, leaving it a glitching mess, he began to inhale deeply as his throat and eyes began to glow an ominous orange color. As he then summoned a grand power star above his head, the darkness prepared to absorb it into its body before Bowser did it, before the darkness could get a handle on the power itself. And he then launched a rainbow beam of energy into the distance, creating a gigantic black hole that began to absorb the darkness into it. With Izumi and Junior, she had her hand extended towards the small Koopa as he did the same. Just as the two were about to reach one another, something attached itself to Junior's leg, and the two just stared at it for a second. All before Junior realized what was about to happen. Pulling his clown copter away from the ship, he flew back to his father to assist him in holding off the darkness as long as they could. All whilst Izumi screamed out his name as the ship blasted far away into the known cosmos. Sorry Mama, sorry Dad? I couldn't escape the darkness. Junior muttered as he lowered himself next to his father. Junior? What are you doing here? Bowser growled at his son. Helping you with the time I have left, Junior said, leaping out of his little machine. Bowser continued to glitch continuously as he looked at his son, the darkness growing up his child's foot. He couldn't believe that his son had been infected as well, all in the span of a few hours. 3 of the 4 strongest magic users in the known cosmos were completely infected with this muck's presence inside them. And Bowser could only let out a furious scream of fury as he glared at the darkness as it slowly was coming out of the black hole he'd created before he glanced at his son. Want to show this muck who's in control? Bowser asked his son. Yeah, Junior said, as he pulled out his paintbrush. Forming black paint on the edge of the brush, he threw a large painted hole on the ground that Bowser willingly stepped into. His body slowly sunk into the black paint before his entire body came out of it, still glitchy but at the same time far more powerful than he was before. His entire body was a black mass with whited out eyes before his hair became a glitchy crimson color as he launched towards the darkness as it created a clone of him and Junior. As the two forces clashed in the middle of the vortex of the black hole, a massive shockwave was blasted out from their attacks. Back with Izumi, the young dragon girl had watched Bowser and Junior team up against the darkness. Sliding down to her knees, she felt even more tears falling from her eyes as she watched the two take on their doppelgangers with as much power as the two could. And she watched as their first clash created a massive shockwave that blasted the ship faster out into the cosmos before Izumi turned her back to the fight as she pulled her legs up to her chest. Just like that, she lost the love of her life, and a child who was like a son to her. Something nobody had shown to her a day in her life was affection and love that she'd give to others, and to see Bowser reciprocate the love she gave him was not expected in her mind. Sure, she knew he liked her, but she didn't know on how deep a level he really appreciated her until he screamed it out at her about a few minutes ago. Boyfriend walked over to her as he looked guilty as he sat across from her. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 was with him as well as the two just sat across from her, using her magic to watch the fight between the two forces. She grew increasingly distraught when Junior had been assimilated far before Bowser was, as he was forced to fight 3 opponents at once with his power slowly waning over time. By the time she had lost connection, The 3 glitchy enemies that Bowser had faced had knocked him to the ground and completely covered him in the darkness muck that had taken control of the entire galaxy at this point. Everything I know, everything I came to care for, is 𝗔𝗂𝗄𝗏, Izumi muttered as tears fell from her eyes. I'm sorry, boyfriend said as he looked at her full of guilt. I don't care anymore, Izumi said, her face dark. What? Boyfriend asked, as Izumi stood up with a very furious scowl on her face. I don't care what I want anymore, if I have to save the universe at the cost of my happiness. Then so be it, Izumi growled as she pulled out her notebook with a very determined scowl on her expression. Boyfriend looked far out into the distance to see that the massive wave of darkness was slowly coming ever closer to them. Izumi continued to use her magic as she pulled her wand and moved herself towards the middle of the ship as it sailed across the galaxy in silence. And as boyfriend was about to warn Izumi about the darkness coming towards them, he watched as the entire ship had become encompassed with a star-shaped circle of magic before their position disappeared from the galaxy. Reappearing deep within the Mushroom Kingdom, Izumi placed the ship high in the sky. All before starting her magic in order to turn back time on the entire planet itself as well as change the fate of the known galaxy by sending the darkness back from where it came. Sweat fell down from her brow as she muttered the incantation as much as possible to make sure that the spell itself worked in order to send the darkness away from this world. Boyfriend stood up as he walked over to Izumi and 𝗵𝗃 was right next to him, both wearing a worried expression on their faces. What's the plan? Boyfriend asked, as Izumi looked at him from the corner of her eye. Using all the magic? I in the darkness, to to rap battle, 𝗧𝗵𝗏, Mushroom Kingdom, residents, and Bowser, Izumi said, straining her magical power to even talk to him. Who are the people I need to battle? Boyfriend asked, concerned. Mario, Luigi, Peach, Jay Jr., and Bebo Bowser. Izumi strained out as boyfriend nodded and left 𝗵𝗃 not far behind. It's such a sad thing to see you feeling such pain, Rosalina said, as Izumi grunted in effort to use her spell. 𝗬𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏. Izumi grunted in effort. You care for Bowser and the others, don't you? Rosalina asked, floating around her. Oh, of course. I do. Izumi growled out, her draconic features flaring out behind her. Then you should know that if you do this, you are not only rewriting history, but you are effectively going to destroy yourself, Rosalina said, as Izumi grunted even more. I die. If the world, and it's the ones I loved safe. Izumi growled as she felt her entire soul slowly ebbing away into the spell itself. Then, what do you think will happen when they find out that you gave your life so they could live? Rosalina asked again. 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗏. Izumi grunted out as she coughed out some blood. Her eyes shrunk deeply as she spent her entire focus on using this singular spell. And glancing over at Rosalina, she found the woman glitching a little bit, but for some reason she wasn't reaching out to touch her in order to pass on the darkness over to Izumi. But for some reason Rosalina just didn't touch her body even once, and that was when Rosalina then touched the ground where the ship connected to Izumi as the darkness prepared to attack her. But Rosalina prevented it from attacking Izumi entirely. You wish to spend your life in order to protect this world? Rosalina asked. Izumi grunted as Rosalina flew up into the air once more. Then I will do what I must in order to assist you, Rosalina said, as Izumi just focused on her task. 0W0? Boyfriend stood across from Mario, as the red hat-wearing plumber had stood across from him. His face glitching everywhere, but the most important part about him was his glowing red eyes and the meat cleaver that had found itself back in his hands as it spun around in his grasp. Not too far away from the young man was Princess Peach, Luigi, and Toad. The trio staring at him with nothing more than contempt as 𝗵𝗃 entered the battle with him. It's me, Mario. The glitched voice of Mario warbled out. Let's go. Mario's voice continued, as the two entered a rap battle.